Smile. It's not the end of the world. Add to stream. I'm adding your slide now. Good. Looks good. Hi, Caroline. Hi, Facebook user. I did bring a glass of water today and a jug of coffee, caffeine.
Coffee would be nice.
Can you hear the music?
No. If you're talking to me.
That's all right. Okay, I'll do something here. All right, people are joining us now. I'm just gonna start. I haven't checked to see what's happening on YouTube. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, guys. Thank you for joining us. It's me again, Katina Chivasa and Ben Harris here. I don't know if you can see me clearly, but I know my light is a little bit funny here where I am, but it's all good. You don't really need to see me. You know what I look like with my old hairstyle. I've got Ben Harris here. He's a medical microbiologist and scientist and happens to be my business partner as well. So we are doing this series where we just want to educate people on coronavirus COVID-19, and we are happy to take questions from anyone. So we are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook. I think I've put myself on like 4 platforms, streaming from StreamYard. So wherever you're watching from, welcome. And please, can you confirm if you can hear me clearly? I'm just gonna log on to YouTube right now whilst Ben is introducing himself so that I can see if people can hear me. Angelina, hi, can you hear me? Oh yes, she says hi, Ben. So as usual, Ben, you know what I'm gonna be doing is and can you guys tell me something before we start? Can you hear the music playing in the background? Angelina, can you hear the music playing in the background? Watching from Botswana, Gebs, that's Cameron, Caroline Pofo, hi, so good to see you. Can you hear the music playing in the background? It's saying, where are you from Corona? I don't know if people can hear that. I'm playing a song from Laziti. Inonzi, where are you from Corona? Corona. So it's about Corona. Or can you hear the music? Can you hear the music? Yep. Ah, beautiful. If people can hear the music, then I'm just going to do this one more time, baby. All right. I think I've got Laziti here, and he has given me permission to use his music. So I might as well, just so that it's not too boring. We want to make this as exciting as possible.
Are you saying I'm boring, Katina?
Oh, no, they can't hear the music. It's okay, guys. You're not boring. Okay, it's okay, guys. You can't hear the music, that's fine. I'll tell you that when you tune into the radio, you're going to hear the music. I'm the only one who can hear the music at the moment, which is fine. So it's all good. No interruptions, that's fine. Next time when we tune into the radio, you'll be able to hear the music. I'm recording the radio station at the same time whilst I'm talking to you guys. So Thank you so much for joining us, guys. And Ben, welcome one more time, and thank you so much for your time to just come here and share your knowledge. I am privileged, guys, to work with Ben Harris. Like I said before, medical microbiologist and scientist, and happens to be an infection prevention and control consultant, which is what I am as well. I'm a registered nurse here in New Zealand, trained in Zimbabwe, and Ben happens to be my business partner as well. So I've asked Ben to say, hey, Ben, there's so many questions that are coming from Zimbabwe, from Africa, and could you please just come and give us some of your responses and also your knowledge? Just share some of your knowledge for free without any charge, just because I'm the one who is asking him. So this is actually quite a rare opportunity that we're having here. Somebody who is actually, he is well known across New Zealand, and I can tell you that even the Minister of Health and so many people, like organizations, they use Ben, and I am blessed. I don't want to brag too much about you, Ben. Otherwise, we might end up losing track here. So
Well,
over to you, Ben. I'll just welcome a few viewers here. David Kamutini, hi, so good to see you. He says he's in South Africa. Angelina, yes, hi, I know you. You're one of the top fans, and Kanye Masile, and I'm just here on Facebook at the moment. I'll come and say hello to those who are on YouTube later on when we take our break. Siwo Jampaya, good to see you. Dorcas Tasha, so good to see you, sister. And everyone else, Faith, Pamela, and everyone else who's going to join us, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll find this informative and educative. Facebook user, I can't see your name, so I don't know who you are. So Ben, over to you. And guys, just so you know, we've got the slides that Ben is going to be using showing on the screen, and I'll be flashing some of your messages and your questions as we go. So just feel free. Hi Nelly, good to see you. Feel free to type in your questions as we go. I'm going to be reading some of the questions that we got this afternoon, which were really, really quite powerful. Hey Ben. So Ben, over to you before I start preaching.
Thank you very much, Katina, and for your introduction. And just for those viewers and listeners that were not aware, as Katina said, she's a registered nurse. She's worked for 5 or so years in intensive care unit, which is the pinnacle in many ways of aspect of very pressurized nursing, very exacting. She's also got a master's degree in the infection control with honors, I may add. And she runs marathons and ultra marathons in her spare time, and she's a dynamic person. So yesterday, day before was it actually, I was speaking to Melbourne and Australia as well, because 49 rest homes in the one city, Melbourne, have now come down with COVID virus. But please, as Katina said, just send any questions into her. Unfortunately, I can't actually see them, but she'll read them out. No trouble with interrupting. The only rule is no question is too simple. So please ask anything. And it's often the simple ones that most people do not like to ask. But if you don't know it, there'll be many others that do not. So please, any question at all. Anyway, we will start and just interrupt anytime you wish, and the same goes for Katina. Interrupt when you're reading out questions anytime you wish. I think one of the key things is knowledge. Knowing things helps neutralize fear. So at the beginning of a new illness or disease, whether it's SARS or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome or Ebola or Zika, it is really, really frightening when we do not know anything about it, where it came from, how you catch it, or anything else. And the main fear tends to be always, what are my chances? What myself, as an individuals, are always frightened about the unknown and whether they will catch it and whether they will die from it. And I just wish to start at the beginning. We know now 7 months. It's not lots, but there's been billions of dollars put into the research and understanding. So we have a lot to learn yet about COVID-19, including vaccines and such like. But by the same token, we have learnt a great deal as well. So mainly, I wish many people listening are probably, by far the majority, are under 63 years old. And most people with COVID, by far the majority, at least over 80 out of every 100, will have mild symptoms. Mild symptoms. And mild symptoms may be just a runny nose, or they may be just a little bit of diarrhea, nothing else, no temperature, nothing else, or they may be just a slightly sore throat and nothing else. So in some ways, that's most people that have clinical symptoms, actually symptoms. But as well as that, there's perhaps between another 20 and 60 people out of 100 that catch COVID-19 and have no symptoms at all. So a large number of people catch COVID-19 and never develop symptoms at all. But when most people do catch it, 80 out of 100 at least have them mild. Then there's a much smaller number, 14 out of 100, that have more severe, typical influenza type symptoms, but only a very small number, at 4.7%, of those with symptoms go on to end up in intensive care unit or have very serious illness. But when we look at the age groups and the 2 bars, or the 3 bars on the right, the more orangey color ones, that's over 60-year-olds, 3.6%, 3.6 out of 100. Then 70 to 79-year-olds, see how it escalates with the elderly. And in percentage terms, there's always a difference between percent and absolute numbers. So every 100,000 deaths in the United States, that's huge, 100,000 deaths. But if I can use the expression, 100,000 deaths is only, and I don't like using that term because obviously it's tragic for those that have died, is only 0.03% of the United States population, every 100,000 deaths. But when we see it on the media and on the news and such like, or hear about it, it seems really frightening. On top of that, we know that most people that die in percentage terms of COVID-19 are not only at the older age group, as you can see, but the majority of them that die have an underlying illness, which is often called a comorbidity. So those with heart disease plus elderly are more likely to be in that tiny number that get critically ill. Similarly for diabetes, they're more likely to be the elderly and get critically ill. Same as respiratory infections and so on, high blood pressure and to a certain extent some cancers. It's also said that most people that die with COVID-19 would have died anyway within 12 months. Now, we all have to die at some stage, and so it tends to be, obviously, the elderly that do die, and most will have died from one of their underlying illnesses, one or more of their underlying illnesses, within 12 months, within a year. And just like influenza, many people that actually die of COVID die with COVID plus the other underlying illnesses rather than just of COVID. Many do die just of COVID, but the majority die with it and are elderly and have significant underlying illnesses. I put that in perspective because in the workforce, and many people listening will be in the workforce, they'll be under 63 years old, and so the actual death rate is really, really small in that age group. And when we put it in perspective again, we know that there may be 10 million new cases of tuberculosis, of TB every year, and large numbers of smoking deaths every year, and large numbers of HIV every year. And somehow we've got used to those and factor those in. But we're not used to COVID yet. When there is an outbreak anywhere, I'll just go through this quickly, the same as any outbreak. We try and confirm that that's what it is causing it, in this case, COVID. If there is testing available, we immediately try and isolate anybody with symptoms at all. And we notify suitable people, and we try and decide what is in common. Do they have a cough and temperature and such like? As I said, we try and confirm it if we can. If it's in a healthcare facility or other institution, then we try and sketch a quick diagram of where all the beds are there and where did the individual cases come from, and try and learn, is there anything in common to the people that came down with it that may have helped spread it, so we can do something about it. So we try and formulate or gauge an idea of how it may have spread from one person to another within. Then we try and mitigate or reduce the risks. So there'll be really good hand hygiene and really good mask wearing, pressing it firmly against our face so it can't leak around the bottom. And then we do a summary. During times like that, communication is essential, because whenever there's an outbreak, there is fear and rumors spread really fast. So many people be really anxious, can get a bit hysterical, and will I take it home? Will I give it to my family? Will I give it to patients? And if you are a leader in healthcare, or a leader because you're listening to this, you're going to know more than many other people in general. You obviously thirst for knowledge. People will look to you for what you know. Let them know what you do know, and let them know what you do not know. It is very, very powerful, and build up trust and understanding. And I use the expression boots on the ground. If you're involved in a healthcare situation, walk around and ask people, hear what they have to worry about, and let them know anything that can help reduce their fears. Rumors are powerful. Go to any meetings about it, making sure everyone's keeping a suitable distance apart so they don't spread it so readily. Remembering IPC, which is infection, prevention and control. It's not just an island. The infection, prevention and control person does not run everything. They're just feeding information in, and everybody should know something about it. Everybody knows that masks help hugely. Everybody knows that hand hygiene helps hugely, and everybody knows isolate those that are ill and do not spend too long with them, sharing the same air as ill people when you're inside. And CME, continuing medical education, keep giving it on PPE, personal protective equipment, which is the gowns and the masks. Cannot communicate too much. Watch, 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 observe, observe, observe. Ask people, what are they doing? How do they do it? Show me, whether that's in rest homes, and how they're doing hand hygiene, how they're cleaning the environment. Remembering liquid soap and water works really well against COVID virus. It's made up of a fatty layer and it dissolves it very, very readily. Liquid soap and water, even liquid soap and water, dissolves it very, very readily. Visitors going to a healthcare facility or to your home, if there's someone suspected of COVID, they risk taking it back and spreading it on further. And observe for any changes you need to make. All the way throughout the outbreak, keep the communication going, not just at the beginning. Keep those boots on the ground, shoes on the ground, feet on the ground, whatever. Go around and talk. Give written and talk about it. Keep the communication going and keep the updates going regularly. So re-looking at that again, just to try and keep things in perspective, we've got most people by far have mild symptoms and recover. Most people with moderate symptoms recover. And in fact, most people with severe symptoms recover. It's only the relatively very small number that, in percentage terms, and they tend to be the elderly and those with underlying significant health conditions, mainly obesity or fatness, high blood pressure, heart, kidney conditions. They're the main ones that are more likely to not make the grade, especially when their oxygen levels come down below 92% or so, if there are any hospital-related people there. And on
Right.
top of that,
Glenn,
yes, certainly.
can I just interrupt? And the reason I'm going to interrupt you when I see more than 3 questions is because we've got people who are watching from Africa, and data is an issue. So
Yes.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some of the questions that are here, even if it means you having to jump a slide because of a question. That'll be good, just
No
so that
trouble
they
at all.
can
Very,
capture
very
something.
happy for that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first question that has come through, and I don't know, it might direct you to another direction, but it's all good. Sabina Anesuru, is it good to see you? And she has asked a question here, which I'm just going to show here. How does exercise help prevent COVID-19?
I really like the question. In science, we don't necessarily know the hows, how something happens. So for immunity, we know things like wearing a mask and hand hygiene and not breathing the same air helps prevent us significantly catching the infection. Then we rely on our immunity. And in the case of COVID-19, because it's a brand new virus to us humans, it's not to bats, but to us humans, we collectively, until November, December last year, nobody on this planet had any immunity to COVID-19 at all. So we have no immunity. However, our immune system is simple and complex. One part of our immune system is called innate. And the innate immune system is things like your saliva, the acid in your stomach, the microbes or the bacteria on your skin. They work against any microbe, whether we have any contact before with it or not. They work on all microbes, whether we've seen that new infection before or not. So that's the innate immune system. Then we have what's called an adaptive immune system. And all mammals and animals have that, actually after sharks first developed teeth, long time, many years ago. And we have an adaptive immune system. So once humans come across, and mammals and other animals, once they come across a new disease, bacteria or pathogen or virus, we do a number of responses, including setting up antibodies against that specific infection. And sometimes those antibodies last for a lifetime, like measles, and sometimes they last for 4 to 6 weeks, like norovirus, the diarrhea and vomiting virus. And we suspect at the moment with COVID-19, those that have been infected and developed antibodies to COVID-19, they tend to lose about half their antibodies by 6 weeks to 2 or 3 months. They lose, so we look as though we're not going to keep the antibodies for very long. But there's another part of the adaptive process, and that's called cells, often T, what's called T for tongue. T for tongue, although it's not that, I just say it so you can hear it clearly, the letter T. The T cells will go along as part of the immune system, and they have a memory too, and they help wipe out the virus and or the cells that have got the virus in them. So that's part of the immunity. Somewhere in the mix, we know from other infections that our entire immune system, which I've just given a very brief overview from, seems to work better when, as you correctly say, we do light to moderate exercise. If we're moderately fit, light to moderately fit, our immune system works better, measurably better. If we get good night's sleep, a good 7 to 8 hours sleep, our immune system works better. If we have a good, varied, plant-based diet, our immune system works better. So all of those things, we don't know why, but, which was the question you asked, but you're right, they do work better. And things like vitamin D for David, which we get from the sun, helps our immune system work better. And I can spend some time on that now or later if you wish, Katina, on the vitamin D.
Right. On the vitamin D, I think that would bring us back to the question that was asked this afternoon by Broach. Unfortunately, I'm trying to retrieve some of those questions. You know what? I would say we can push that one forward a little bit. Just hang on. Let me just go to the next question, and then I'll bring you to the vitamin D one, because I want to read Broach's question again so that you can elaborate on the things that you spoke about this afternoon. The next question comes from Kerry. Kerry Kangausaru Hanzi. He says, those that recover, what I think it meant to say ratio, if any, can they share on how they went about it? It's not very clear whether it's ratio. Those that recover, what ratios, if any, can they share on how they went about it? I'm starting to think whether he's asking about the infectious. Maybe is he trying to, or he or she, sorry, she trying to ask about the how we were talking about how the infectious percentages of, like, to say how infectious is COVID-19 and like compared to TB, compared to measles. I'm not sure if that's what we can answer that one, just so that people can know about that as well. Infectious rates of.
I'll come back but later on the numbers. In general, we are most infectious for probably 1 to 2 days for COVID-19. This is only for 1 to 2 days before we develop symptoms, and then most infectious probably starts reducing over the next 10 days after that, as a rule of thumb. So we have the maximum number of virus in our respiratory tract that we're likely to spread from 1 to 2 days before we get symptoms. And then as soon as we get symptoms, the number of virus comes down, and we'd need to breathe more air or more droplets to get infected over the next 10 days or so. That's as a rule of thumb. Those that get seriously ill, because I just wasn't quite sure of the question, those that get seriously ill and recover, that can be 2 or 3 months. And some people can have effects, as with influenza, I might add, that can go on for quite some time. And because we tend to be more elderly when we get seriously ill, that knocks us about even more as well. I don't know that anyone's learnt anything on how they help get over it, but depression can be hard. It really knocks people a lot. To try and get up and go. Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
You the moment when you move, you are breaking. I don't know, when you make some movements, and I don't know what's happening there. You seem to be breaking a little bit.
I'll try coming in again. I've got a little bit closer.
Do you have another device that's on in the background?
Another device that which?
Do you have your YouTube on over there? Yeah. Have you got another device on over there?
There's no YouTube on. Do you hear me clearly?
Okay. All right. Let me just be a little bit creative here. Give me okay. You can talk. I think only one person can talk at the same time, at a time. All right. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not sure if you rephrase your question to the questioner that wrote it into Katina, we may be able to be more specific. Was there another question to Katina? Do you hear me? Are you there?
Yes, there's another question. And I will check to see. Yes, I can hear you. I can. Yeah. Okay. So All right. So Kerry has come back. I'll just stay on that question again. He says, she says, those that recover, what tips, if any, can they share on how they went about it? So she is asking about the recovery, like what tips, and I think we're going to touch on that as we go, because towards the end we did talk about like how people recover and use. You did mention things like exercise as well, and food, the diet, and all sorts of things, and the social distancing. And I think it's something that you mentioned at the start, but we can touch on that again
But
later.
specifically on your question, I think I've not seen anything published to show all those things, the diet and the fitness, the vitamin D, and the good night's sleep. They all help prevent you catching it in the first place. I have never seen anything that's been published to show that when they were recovering, when they did this or when they did that, it made any difference at all. It's like influenza. When you get whacked out, it's run over by a bus syndrome if you get it really badly. And as you come through, we all respond differently. Some people are pessimists, some are optimists. And we know that attitude, for instance, can help healing. If you're positive, even though you're feeling bad, but you're an optimist and you're positive, that encourages healing of wounds, for instance, infected wounds. And we can measure that quite clearly. So that would be the nearest I could come to giving you an answer on that. Otherwise, I've seen nothing at all. Next question, please.
Next question is already on the screen, and you said you can't see the question. So this is Angelina Ballerina. She says, is COVID-19 a once-off disease, or there is a possibility of reinfection? And I know you've got a slide on this, and you spoke about this afternoon, but can you please maybe revisit that as long as you can, because this is a question that's coming up a lot.
It's a very good question, because that ties in, that's the key to knowing how long this is going to be a major problem on Earth. So far, excuse me, this virus has only been in humans since November, December last year, for only 7 months or so that it's been on Earth. There's no good published paper to show that anybody that has caught it again. So we know that having an infection seems to give us immunity for at least 7 months. And we won't know how much longer it gives us immunity until humans have had it for longer. So in 2 years' time, or 1 year's time, or 5 years' time, we'll see how many people catch it again when they've had it before. That's the first answer. The second answer is that with primates, so monkeys, when they've been infected, they lose, it's called a half-life, start losing a significant number of their measurable antibodies by 3 to 6 months. So they may lose a significant number by 3 to 6 months. That's not a good sign, losing 3 to 6 months antibodies. But as I said before, the antibodies that you can measure are only one part of our immune system. We also have T cells, which are not easily measurable, and they may last quite a lot longer and give us immunity for longer. We just do not know. For instance, hepatitis B, when we get vaccinated, we have antibodies that last for about 8 years. But if we've had the full 3 shots of hepatitis B vaccination, then nobody, unless they're immunocompromised, nobody has gone on to catch hepatitis B for their whole life, even though they'd lost their antibodies after they've been exposed to hepatitis B. So once you've been vaccinated hepatitis B, if you're not immunocompromised, the immunity lasts for life, even though the measurable antibodies only last for about 8 years. We have the doubts that the immunity will last for COVID-19 because colds are also a coronavirus like COVID-19. And the antibodies to colds only last a few months. And so quite often people can catch 2 colds a year because we keep losing the antibodies to them. Yet We know that measles is an RNA virus, and immunity to that, it's not a coronavirus, but it's an RNA virus, the immunity to that lasts 98% effective for the rest of your life once you've been vaccinated to measles. So it looks as though this may be a bit more like a cold type response. That's the bad news, but in general, and we do not know at all this yet, many infections, when we get the seasonal influenza, it's not nearly as bad as when that type of influenza, currently H3N2 or H1N1, which was the so-called swine flu, the second one, H1N1, but before that, H3N2 had been infecting people every year as seasonal influenza since 1968. When it first came in 1968, H3N2, 68, 69, it hit really hard as a new pandemic around the world. Then we had a residual immunity to this whole new strain of influenza, and we got it comparatively less in the following years. So I think it's pretty obvious that over the next 3 to 5 years, everybody on Earth will be exposed to COVID-19. We just can't avoid it.
Mm.
If a vaccine, two things could happen. One, if at some stage we lose our immunity and it comes again, it's quite possible we may not get it quite as badly as we got it the first time. There's no guarantee on that, but it's quite possible we don't get it as badly the first time. It's thought, for instance, that when colds first came, the coronavirus colds first came into humans, they may have gone from bats to cows to humans, possibly, we're not sure of that they hit really hard for a start, maybe like a bad influenza. There's been some postulation on it. But now we've got so used to it, hundreds of years later, that it's just more like a cold. So it's possible it starts getting less each time we get it, but not definite. Also, it's more probable within 1 to 5 years from now, there may start to becoming vaccines available, and that would reduce getting again. But at the moment, within 7 months, nobody with reliable information, nobody has caught it more than once. So I hope that helped. So reasonably long-winded answer, but I hope it helped. Next question, please.
Yes, that's right. Okay. So this is quite an interesting one, and I think we get this quite a lot even here in New Zealand, where people say this. That's Sabina Anesuruizi says, I believe I had it in December. However, whiskey saved my life. Do you think alcohol can kill COVID-19?
I think I'm a whiskey drinker too, as it happens. I like my whiskey.
You can share one with Sabina. She would love that.
Very welcome. Anytime. We'll share a whiskey.
My Mandela.
That sounds good. And you just put a little bit of water with it and savor the taste for a good long time. Down to about 20% alcohol. The difference is,
oh wow,
whiskey on average may have a percentage of alcohol about 33%, something like that, 33, 35%. I know there are some higher proof ones, but they're not common. About 33%, and it probably takes more than that. We're generally around 60% alcohol to be killing the virus. So if it flushed your veins and your cheeks and made you feel better and lifted your morale and spirits, then that may have helped you get over it. But I don't think, on the knowledge we have now, and like all science, just because nothing's been written about it doesn't mean to say that you're not exactly right and that whiskey did work. But it's hard to imagine that it might work other than to use a pun, raising your spirits.
Especially in these depressive and anxious moments, we need whiskey.
That's right.
No, a few days ago, I came from running and I rang Ben and I said, "Hey, dude, I just want a beer right now." And he's like, "What?" I said, "I just feel like I want a beer." So you never know.
Ben never normally touches a drop of alcohol, and I was astounded.
Okay. There is a question here which is quite long. What I'll do is, Signora, I see your question. I think I did touch on that this afternoon. I'm just gonna leave that for a little while. It's quite a long one. I'm just gonna leave that for a little while because it would lead into a discussion. I know you wanted to call in to talk to Ben. I'll see if Ben wants to have a one-on-one with you and just have a long discussion because Ben likes to talk in depth just like you do. But at the moment, we've got a slide prepared for people, and I don't think we really want to get into like the scientific and spiritual theories arguments. I don't think we would want to do that because some people might not find that interesting or you know, how safe are people? Okay, I'll just take this one here. Sorry, Senior, I'm not ignoring you, but I think I'll just come to this one here. Okay, the next question, Ben says, how safe are people with autoimmune diseases? For example, SLE, and we have heard that chloroquine is being used on COVID-19. Most patients with SLE use plaquenil. I don't know what that is, and chloroquine. Does that make them safe, or they are still in high risk? I don't know what that plaquenil is.
When
It must be.
some famous people, for the wrong reasons, I think, lots of President Trump says
Yeah.
the chloroquine type approach, then suddenly the rest of the world thinks it must be true. It's been soundly and very clearly ruled out as offering any benefit whatsoever at all. Unfortunately, when somebody says something like that, immediately everybody started buying it, including the United States, and suddenly there was none left for all those people with malaria and such like, where we knew it would save lives. Suddenly it was not able to be bought anywhere, and yet it didn't work at all on COVID-19. For autoimmune illnesses, it's hard to tell. Guillain-Barré is a peripheral neuropathy, so people get paralyzed from maybe their legs or arms. About 5% die, 5 out of 100 die. You generally recover over weeks to months, and you would have seen a number in an intensive care unit, Katina. And we know that 1 in 2,000 people that get Campylobacter infection, for instance, Campylobacter diarrhea, food poisoning, 1 in 2,000 go on to get Guillain-Barré about 6 months later. So it sets off an autoimmune type illness, which we generally recover from. Many illnesses, including salmonella, can set off, and a small number of people can set off an arthritis, which we recover from, reactive arthritis. So I think I'm not aware of autoimmune people necessarily being in a worse situation than those that are not. They may be. I haven't seen anything published on it. I'm not saying it hasn't been. But interestingly, and this becomes a key point to understand, when we get an infection, whether it's an infected cut or wound or anything else, it is not the microbe itself that is the problem. You can have an infected cut with vast numbers of bacteria in it, and if you have a very low immune system, you will not have any swelling or any immune response. You'll not have a whole lot of pus coming out of it. You'll not have a temperature, and you'll not have a big response. Now, those bugs could keep going long enough and completely overcome all your organs, and you could die from it. But what I'm saying is, it's the symptoms when we get infections that are the main problems that we see, and the symptoms are our immune system at work. So pus is full of white cells that have gone to an infection to help kill the bugs. So the white cells are the pus, and that is the immune system. A temperature is the immune system. Swelling is the immune system. Now, all of that's triggered by the bugs, but it is not the bugs themselves. The really important point I'm about to make is that with COVID-19, we seem to get a really exponential immune response, like a hypersensitivity or hyperallergic reaction. So people that have a normal good immune system and COVID, our immune system can overreact, and it's that is the trouble. The very high temperatures, the very inflamed lung tissue, etc. So it's an overreactive immune system. So something like dexamethasone that reduces our immune system as immunosuppressive seems to help people a little bit from symptoms of COVID-19. It seems to protect them a little bit because they don't get such a marked reactive response to COVID-19. Thank you. Next question, if that covers that.
I think it does. It's just somebody was asking Kutanzi. Oh, sorry. Now I'm speaking my language. What is SLE? And I just chucked it up there.
Systemic lupus erythematosus.
That's right. And I think the question was quite clear. It said that in autoimmune disease, but people just didn't know what the SLE stands for. But that's all right.
And that is when our immune system, I'll just slip in here because it may come up later. An autoimmune system, our body is unbelievably clever. We have vast numbers of bacteria in our gut, maybe 50 to 90 trillion bacteria in our gut. And that they become, that whole mixture, part of a significant part of our immune system, believe it or not. It's called our microbiome. They're a significant part of our immune system, and they help detect friend from foe. So if we're drinking milk bottle bugs out of pasteurized milk, they know not to over-respond. But if we're eating Campylobacter from raw chicken that's contaminated with Campylobacter, they know to try and neutralize that Campylobacter. How they know how they do that beggars belief. It's really, really hard. We, at least in those parts of the world that have had more medicine available, have treated with antibiotics more, and the collateral damage is also that it's hit all our relatively good bugs in our gut as well. So our good bugs are lower in numbers, and thus our immune system is less. And sometimes our immune system, because it's not as good as it could be then confuses parts of our tissues within our body as being foreign and starts attacking them. A good example, the best example, is a disease which you're probably familiar with called rheumatic fever. And that is when a bacteria called Streptococcus A, group A strep or Streptococcus A, gives us a sore throat. And generally we recover from it, but often we need an antibiotic, penicillin or amoxicillin, to treat it. But a few weeks later, especially in the young or under 20-year-olds primarily, under 25-year-olds primarily, when our immune system has got rid of that strep bacteria in the throat, which has caused a sore throat, that streptococcus has protein very similar to our heart tissue. And our immune system can get a bit confused, having got rid of the streptococcus bad bacteria in the throat. It then goes on and starts being antagonistic to our heart tissue. So that's an example of an autoimmune illness. Thanks, Katina. You there?
Okay. Thank you, Ben, for that. I don't know what's going on with your network. I can see it's bubbling a little bit, but that's all right. Can you hear me clearly from there?
I can hear you very clearly, yes. Thank you. Any more questions or keep going?
Okay, all right. Signor, no hard feelings. What I think I could do right now is Cleaning clothes because bacteria. Okay, I'm just gonna let you proceed for now, and then we'll
Yeah,
pick on as just so that people can get as more of what you had prepared for us, and
sure.
then
Yeah,
as I'll see if people keep asking the same questions, and then I'll get back to the comment section. I'm reading the questions, and I'll just flash them as we go. I know you can't see them, but
yeah.
I'll interrupt you.
Thank you. No trouble. One extra thing I'll just say on this picture. Of course, I've left off the box on the top above mild. 20 to 60 people out of every 100 that technically catch COVID-19 have no symptoms at all. They can pass it on to others who may get symptoms, but they have no symptoms and will never develop them. So that makes these numbers actually even smaller still, just to keep things in perspective. Okay, without symptoms or asymptomatic, we know they've got it because a swab test is positive. COVID nucleic acid is the fancy name, is positive for it, but they don't have symptoms. Some of those go on to develop symptoms, but many of them never develop symptoms. They're called asymptomatic, but if that group then went on to develop symptoms, in retrospect, we would know it was pre-symptomatic. Then mild symptoms I've just got there can be as mild as even a slightly runny nose, or feeling a bit tired today, or a little bit of diarrhea, slightly sore throat. So they can be mild right through to including fever, but it can be any one of those. So we must bear that in mind. Generally, you'll not know you've got COVID. Then it becomes more moderate, severe, and the critical, very seriously ill cases. And there's a range, but they're the smaller numbers. Moving on, I often think of, in many industries, the so-called Swiss cheese model is good to look at. And Swiss cheese, if you're familiar with it, often has holes in it. Some types of it, Emmentaler and such like, have holes in it. And that's from the microbes making the cheese when it's being made, producing carbon dioxide bubbles, a bit like bubbles in a Coca-Cola bottle when you take the top off. So it produces bubbles. Now, the bubbles are all random, but if we take a block of Swiss cheese and cut it up into slices, I've got 4 slices there, then the holes, we're talking about reducing risks when we're looking at a process, in this case, a health system or COVID process. And each one of those slices may represent a risk, and we can never eliminate risk in this world. We can only work towards reducing it. And sometimes, as described by that red arrow, it happens so that all the holes match up, and the analogy will be that would eventually lead to a COVID infection. So we put in hand washing and all the rest, it leads to COVID infection. So looking at that again, when we know there's community COVID-19 virus infection or cases in the community, because it's been tested and everyone's been warned it's increasing in your particular community, then we know that the longer we spend in that community.
Ben?
Yes. Yes.
You are moving quite a lot. I think you're forgetting that. I think something is going on with your Wi-Fi in Christchurch, is it?
It could be.
We seem to be losing
I'll
you a
just
little
move this
bit.
a bit
It's
closer again.
breaking and then it comes back. Yeah.
Just move that a little bit closer again, but it may or may not make a difference.
Yeah. I know you get excited when you talk about the cheese, the Swiss cheese, but all right, go ahead. And then I think when we come to the PPE and all that stuff, I think I'm gonna be interrupting you a little bit. But yeah, keep going.
No trouble. So when there's known cases in the community, then it is more likely that if you spend longer in the community, you're going to pick it up. In particular, when you share the air of people that happen to have it, and they may or may not have symptoms, you're more likely to pick it up. So I always say, think of somebody smoking. When they smoke, if you're inside a room with them when they're smoking, you can smell the smoke far, far stronger than when you're outside and they're smoking. So we breathe less smoke when we're outside, more when we're inside, and the closer to them we are, the more likely we are to breathe even more smoke still. COVID virus works exactly the same. Now, so we can reduce risks by isolating more when it's in the community and having a smaller group spending more time inside with friends. So spending more time outside will reduce risk. Then so the community, the home, the friends, probably 80 out of every 100 COVID infections are spread within the family home because we spend a lot more time in our home community sharing the air of others. And if one of them happens to have COVID, we're more likely to pick it up. Then we do the education so people know what to do, the masks, the isolation, and such like. And then the final risk one is doing what we know works, wearing a mask, hand hygiene, and following the protocols, either isolation, social distancing. And each one of those should reduce the risk of getting COVID. So if we look at that on a systems approach, the green type circles are prevention measures. We know the hazards in the community, or somebody that's coughing or has a temperature or has a runny nose. The engineering controls, if you like, not spending time inside, sharing the same air. Maybe administrative, which may be management if you're working in a rest home or a hospital, educating people. All of those, no risk measure works totally. It's reducing it. Behavioral. Are we wearing the mask properly? Are we doing hand hygiene? Have we isolated everybody? But if we even then get an incident where a resident or patient catches it, then we have to rapidly do the mitigating barriers to lessen the impact of that incident. So everyone wearing as good a mask as you can, wearing it properly, no spilling air around the edges of the mask, hand hygiene, and isolating people to lessen the risks.
So, Ben, just taking you back again, because that's the most important thing that people want to hear. I'm getting a lot of questions, like I said this afternoon as well. People are asking, like, do we really have to wear masks because I'm at work and I can't breathe and I feel like I'm suffocating, and I'm being told that if you don't wear the mask, you're gonna be charged by the policeman and all this. So, like you said, the mask is not totally, you know, preventing you from catching COVID or passing COVID to another person. So, what's your take on this thing of like you gotta wear the mask and it does help? We say we you did mention the word mitigating, that is reducing. So at what extent, and I know we're going to talk about that, but people need to understand why you keep emphasizing on mask education, clean your hands, but the mask is, especially, we see everyone is wearing masks everywhere on social media.
Yes, masks, other than isolation, masks are probably the key critical part to helping reduce the risk. If I cough, large droplets come out, they'll be full of virus, and if I'm wearing a mask, many of those large droplets will not get out. So that stops a lot. If you're wearing a mask, those droplets that got out are much less likely to get into you. Now, I accept fully this is a balance of risks. So if I need to say, of course, if the law in your particular county or area or country is to wear a mask, then you probably have to do what you're told, but or risk the consequences. But we know masks work. They reduce, they're not 100%, but they greatly reduce more than possibly anything else the chances of spreading COVID-19. Either you giving it to somebody else, even though you had no symptoms, you may have been carrying the virus without any symptoms and passing it on to others just in your ordinary breath air, or catching it if you are Sharing the same air in the same room as somebody that has it, that has no symptoms or has symptoms, if you're wearing a mask, you're less likely to catch it. So the more people that wear masks, it's more likely to reduce the numbers in your community. Having said that, I need to be quite clear that over the next 3 to 5 years, probably everybody on Earth is going to be exposed to COVID-19 and will have had contact and or caught it, with symptoms or without. Everybody on Earth will have. If a vaccine comes sooner rather than later, that will save many lives. But when we look at the numbers with COVID-19, as I said before, it seems petrifying. 100,000 deaths a day in the United States is 0.03% of their population. But as humans, what tends to worry us most is immediacy. Now, when people are getting 80 years old or so, the chances of them dying increase hugely every year. And there's a large number of normal elderly deaths every year. We all have to go, all day at some stage. And most of us, that's when we're elderly. If all of those deaths happened in a week, everybody would be petrified. But when they're spread out over a longer period of time, it's easier to manage. It's easier to manage. So if we did nothing with COVID and it went around the world, nobody wore masks, all the mortuaries would be full up, there'd be bodies stacked up outside, there wouldn't be time to bury them. All the rest of the social terror and consequences, food supply chains would stop, everybody would be petrified. But in fact, there may be the same or similar number of total deaths over 3 to 5 years if we did nothing compared to if we did lots. There were some people saved in hospital, but comparatively small number compared to the total number that got it. So we're talking about making politically, socially, business-wise, easier for society to keep going if everybody does not catch it at once, like a tsunami coming through. From that point of view, I accept, especially the masks that filter better are harder to breathe. So you either have a mask that's easier to breathe through and doesn't work as well, or one that's harder to breathe through and works better. I can say no more than that, I think.
Thank you, Ben. If there's any more questions, I think people will be typing them in. I just want to respond to Nyasha. I can see Nyasha, what's Nyasha? Nyasha Chipare. She wants to talk to Ben, and my response, I was just typing it in, but I'm just going to read that out. I was just saying, hi, Nyasha, can you please type in your questions, please, if you can? So I'll check with Ben if he's able to take calls after
Yep,
the presentation.
Of course, very happy.
Or
And
towards
or
the
email
end,
me.
yeah, or email you, or towards the end, what we can do is we can try and accommodate phone calls, because just so you know, guys, it's actually nighttime over here. Depending on what time we finish, we can try and accommodate phone calls as well. So just bear with us, Nyasha. I'm not ignoring you, and some of those people that are typing in lots of comments and questions, we are not ignoring, but it's just there's a presentation that Ben has already prepared, and we know that so many people have benefited from this, and this afternoon it was actually really informative to those who participated in this. So if you just let us and then bring in your questions, and believe me, I will read each and every one of your questions. So Nyasha, just bear with me, and yeah, I can see it does cause a lot of anxiety, this COVID-19, Ben, and this is really helpful, and thank you so much once again for coming to do this for us. And I think on behalf of all the Africans who are going to watch this and listen to this, I just want to say thank you, and we can proceed.
Okay, thanks, Katina. And I hope what we've talked on so far helps put it in perspective better. That yes, it is bad, it's a worldwide challenge, but when we're under 63, it is quite manageable. It's actually become more a social and business chaos that's caused more than the actual infection itself, generally. It's the consequences of it. And we're very lucky in some ways. Across everybody, the death rate may be around 3 per thousand, 3 or 4 per thousand people. Now, if it had been, that's COVID, if it had been SARS, that had 100 people per thousand died, that's 10%. If it had been Middle East Respiratory Syndrome or MERS, that would have been about 380 per thousand died with that, 38%. If it had been bird flu, H5N1, that would have been about 580 per thousand people died from it. Any one of those others could have got away and become worldwide pandemics, but they did not. They were shut down. The one that did get away happened to be COVID, with a comparatively to those tiny death rate. And even then, it's mainly in the elderly that would have died anyway by another significant underlying illness that they may well have died of within 12 months anyway. Just to get those in perspective again. So, infection dose number. I often ask the question, are there good bugs and bad bugs? And people generally say, yes, of course, including medical people. I say it's never as simple as that. So every different type or species of bug has a number above which the average person will succumb and get ill. Their immune system can no longer neutralize it. And below that number, the average person has what's called a subclinical or under clinical infection. So they may have an immune response, but it's too small. We never know we've had it. So milk, bacteria in milk, fresh milk, pasteurized or otherwise, we think of as good bugs. We can drink the milk, and the bugs in it, they boost our immune system. Our immune system just goes along and neutralizes them, keeps us match fit, neutralizes them. But if the milk is very old and smelly and clotted, those microbial numbers may have gone from tens of thousands up to greater than 10 to the 6 per mil, which is greater than 1 million per mil. Tiny little mil. And the average person will get ill, even though we normally think of milk bottle bacteria as relatively good. Salmonella, the average person, that's a food poisoning bacteria, the average person may need to eat or ingest over 1,000 salmonella bacteria before they get ill. Less than that, they will never know they've had them, but their immune system will produce antibodies and immunity to that particular strain. Seasonal influenza. Most people need to breathe more than 800 seasonal influenza virus before they're likely to come down with it. And that 800 is usually within 1 to 2 meters of somebody with influenza when they're coughing. So we're coughing generally 800 within 1 to 2 meters. You walk through their cough spray and you're most likely to come down with it. The average person will come down with influenza. Campylobacter is 500. Then we go way down. Norovirus, the vomiting and diarrhea bug, we need to ingest or breathe and or diarrhea. So we only need to breathe in 10 to 20. And the source, which is vomit or diarrhea when we're ill, that has 1,000 million virus per tiny wee gram or mil of feces or vomit. 1,000 million. So if there's steam coming up from it, then we only need to breathe in or eat 10 to 20 before we get ill. So that's really, really infectious. That's why it is so infectious. Measles, and we cannot vaccinate against norovirus. The immunity from it only lasts for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then we've lost it, unfortunately. And about 7 per 100 people in the population catch norovirus every year. Measles, it only takes 3 to 10 measles virus. That's the most infectious one before the average person will succumb and get measles, unless they've had it before, caught measles infection before, or they've been vaccinated to it. And the vaccine, 2 shots of vaccine for measles, That is about works 98 times out of 100, and importantly, it lasts your whole life. So 98 times. So when somebody does have measles and the community that's vaccinated, it causes very little infections. So that's the infectious dose, every different species. We don't know the infectious dose of COVID, but based on what we do know, we think it may be 1 to 200 viruses we need to breathe in. Or I shouldn't say it's been published, but it might be 100 to 200. So it's more infectious, quite a lot more infectious than influenza. There's a thing called a transmission ability, or R0, or rho value, and that gives an idea of just how infectious these bugs are, and that also relates to that infectious dose I've just been talking about. A rho value is when you have an infection, say COVID, or influenza, or measles for that matter, on average, how many other people will that person pass it on to? And if on average somebody with that infection passes it on to more than one person, then you have an increasing epidemic. But if on average somebody with an infection, say influenza, passes it on to less than one person, and that person that caught it will pass it on to less than one and less than one, so the epidemic then comes to an end because the numbers are decreasing all the time rather than increasing. So that's the rho value, or transmission value. When we look at different bugs, measles up the top, which is airborne, measles virus, which is airborne, when a community is not vaccinated, the average person with measles, because as I said, the infectious dose is only 3 to 10, passes it on to 12 to 18 other people. Unbelievably infectious. That's what the rho value is, 12 to 18 other people. Whooping cough, or pertussis, is also very infectious. The influenza, Spanish influenza, way back in 1918, the average person passed it on to 2 to 3 others. That's really pretty infectious and went around the world very fast. Notice measles and influenza are airborne, and when we look at likes of HIV/AIDS, the average person with it may pass it on to 2 to 5 others, but that is almost always sexually transmitted. So that is easier in many ways to be able to stop. If people take suitable protection, they can stop it, whereas it's a lot harder to stop an airborne transmission of these respiratory viruses. We don't know what the COVID rate is, but it's likely to be 2.5 to 3.5 people at least that people pass it on to. And this is different data. On the left is the rho value, and the blue dots, different researchers. Some of them have come up at 6.5 rho value, but the average is around 2.5 to 3.5. We're not sure what the actual rho value is or transmission value is. It lets us know how infectious it is.
Okay,
Mark,
Ben, can I
yes, certainly.
just interrupt you a little bit? So with the infectious rates, if you can just go back to that one more time, because this is one thing that I think as Africans, because of the way at the moment everyone is panicking on, especially in South Africa, on how they are having so many COVID-19 cases. I think every day, I haven't checked to see what the statistics are, but can you just go back to explaining what these infectious rates are like compared to, okay, you did compare HIV/AIDS with the COVID-19, and then you did mention the measles. Should people be worried much about the COVID-19? You say about 2.5 to 3 people. Like if I have COVID-19 right now, chances of me passing it on is about 2 to 3 people.
Yes.
Okay, so
The difference to a certain extent is, compared to HIV/AIDS, which is a significant challenge in Africa,
yeah,
uh, around the world, but in Africa in many ways in particular,
yeah,
that is sexual contact, and in many ways Not always, but in many ways, with violence it's not, but in many ways sexual contact is, we know, primarily the only way HIV/AIDS can be passed on is almost only by sexual contact. So we know when the risk time is. It's a point in time during sex. That's the point in time when the risk is. Unfortunately, with measles and influenza and COVID, the risk is sharing air with somebody else that has the infection that may or may not have symptoms. So I come back to the smoking one of it, because that's the easiest way to think of it, is think of when there's a smoker, whether we know they're a smoker or not, so it might be invisible smoke and may not smell. If you're in the same room as a smoker, then you're breathing more of their air,
Mm.
and we can tell that it's denser. Similarly, if somebody has COVID, if we're in that room, it's exactly the same. When we breathe more of the air of somebody that has COVID, whether they have symptoms or not, the more likely you are to get it. And probably, as a rule of thumb, anything more than 15 minutes increases your chances significantly when you're in the same room.
Mm.
Anything less than that, if we're talking to somebody who's a smoker, smoking a cigarette outside, that air
Mm.
gets diluted out far, far more. Similarly, if somebody had COVID with or without symptoms, if we're talking to them outside, that reduces our chances hugely of picking up COVID. If we're in a bus with them,
Mm.
then that
Mm.
increases the chances. But if we open the windows of the bus, that reduces the chances. So it's actually very logical. And if somebody has it at home, COVID at home, with or without symptoms, if they're with symptoms, we know what we need to do. They may not have COVID, but if they may have symptoms, they've got a runny nose, not feeling well, and they keep themselves to themselves more, then that reduces the chances of passing it on significantly.
Awesome. I think that would take us
Yeah, on top of that,
to, yeah.
if you wear a mask, that reduces the chances significantly more still.
Uh-huh. And I do know you're gonna say something about those masks, because if the mask is dirty and then it's okay. There's somebody here who is asking something similar to what you were just sharing a few minutes ago. Nyasha Chipare, she's the one who really, she's burning to talk to you, Ben. And I think your Ben's number, he showed his number at the beginning of the slide, so it's not a secret. But she says, me, I have a problem for people smoking, Katina. I am not smoking since my life. I think she has never smoked. That's what she's saying. But the time that I pass, I think whenever she passes through people that smoke, she starts coughing heavily. She doesn't know why.
I just want to be very clear in case the message I've used is causing confusion. For a start, I just wish to say smoking would be the equivalent of, I'm not saying you're at more risk or less risk because you are smoking. I'm just saying that's to give an idea of how much virus you would take in. And so if somebody that was smoking, I don't think I've explained it very well. I'm only saying smoking is a surrogate or an example of clear example we can see of how we would increase our risk if that person happened to have COVID, whether they're a smoker or not. But I'm just trying to say that. As far as you developing significant coughing when you've got anything to do with smoking, as in you breathe in smoked air, smoke has from the cigarette has hundreds of different chemicals in it, and you can be allergic to any one of those. And it can set off asthmatic type allergic response or allergic type responses to one or more of those hundreds of chemicals within cigarette smoke. So I hope I've answered that, clearly. Some people happen to be more allergic to smoke than others, and some develop an allergy over time.
Yep. I can't stand smoke either, Ben, even though I won't cough, but I just can't stand it.
And what we touched on the other day really annoys me, incidentally, in that in the wealthier industrialized countries, there are some exceptions, but most governments have started clamping down on smoking, putting the price up of cigarettes more and more and more until people cannot afford them. And in New Zealand, I think we've got down to somewhere like 12 per 100 people smoke, and it used to be 25.
Yeah.
And the cost keeps going up more and more and more. But the cigarette companies internationally have done something really dreadful, because they're starting to sell less cigarettes in the wealthier country. They're now marketing to poorer countries and encouraging them, and they pick out role models and pay them well to smoke, and increasing and thus killing far more people in the poorer countries to keep their sales up. I think it's despicable.
Yep, story of my life. Okay, now I'm gonna come to this guy here, Senior Anlek, and I think it's a leading question that will come to the masks. Where you've got your slide that says masks. What do they stop? He says, okay. He says, Dr. Ben, sorry if I'm taking you back or distracting the floor. As a medical scientist, don't you think you will agree with me that masks may not be so ideal, particularly those with respiratory challenges like asthmatic people? Is there consideration at all?
I am saying, whatever we do in this life, there is no total prevention, and there's a balance of risks. And masks work, and the more expensive the mask in general, the better it works. But yes, if they are harder to breathe, and so if you are an asthmatic, you have to balance the risk of getting an asthmatic attack by wearing the mask, as opposed to reducing the risk of an asthmatic attack not wearing a mask. But you will be more likely to catch COVID. Then I accept that if you don't wear the mask because of your asthmatic attack, your local laws will probably take no account of that, and they may say, well, they're compulsory to wear, so you get fined or whatever else if you're not wearing one. So if I was in that situation and I had really bad asthma and I knew the mask was making it worse, I guess I would just try and make the edges of the mask not seal to my skin so well. And so the mask is not so effective, but I don't get fined for not wearing a mask. That's a pragmatic response, but that's the nearest I could do. Next question.
Oopsie. Awesome. Okay. Do you want to take more questions? Okay, I'll just put this one on. Right. Senior Anlek again, he says, so also, Dr. Ben, can you enlighten us on the concept of washing hands? Not that I'm opposed to the ideas. It's actually one of our common African practices. Is that very effective? Don't you think that taking a complete body bath is more effective than and can keep us at low risk? So I think, yeah, you understand the question.
I understand the question. We know that respiratory viruses never ever cause an infection by going through the skin. So when you've got intact skin, you never get it by going through the skin. So if you've got virus on your hands, just to be very clear, it's not going to go through your hand and make its way in the blood up to your lung, where it causes infection. The danger of having virus on the hand, which can come by touching a surface that somebody else has touched and they had COVID virus on their hands. The actual danger is that you will then touch your face, your nose, your eyes, or your mouth, those mucosal surfaces. And that's where it gets the entry point. So the hand hygiene would, with COVID virus, would be secondary, dare I say it, compared to breathing the virus in. It's much more likely we're going to breathe it in than get it up to our nose or eyes or mouth by our hands. But that's probably the second most likely way of getting it. So breathing it is by far the most likely. Then touching a surface that somebody else has touched and had COVID, and us then eating finger food or picking our teeth or our nose or other such thing. So in general, having a body wash or body bathe, it's not going to make any difference. It's the hands that are by far the highest risk area. Also, COVID, just to mention it, generally it's quite a fragile virus. Like influenza is fragile, unlike norovirus, which is hardy virus. And both COVID and influenza are killed very easily in the environment with soap and water. Alcohol kills them too, but so does soap and water, kills it very, very readily. And normally with hand washing, the microbes, it doesn't kill them, but they wash down the plug hole, and it works, hand washing. But in the case of influenza and COVID, it actually kills them. Soap and water kills them. Next question.
Right. Ben, because you've introduced quite a few things on there, I just typed up something here for people. And the reason I typed this up is because this is actually my baby. Whenever we go doing presentations, me and Ben, this is my part where we talk about washing hands. And it's not just about washing hands the way we do it in Africa. It's like you do it properly and you have the reasons. You have to know why you are washing your hands. And so for those who are in the medical field or healthcare practitioners, you may be aware or familiar of the 5 moments of hand hygiene. And we do need to know why we are washing our hands. And one of the things that I always like to emphasize on people is to say, know why you are cleaning your hands, know why you are washing your hands and why you have to do it properly. Why we say at least 20 seconds of your time washing your hands with soap and water or with alcohol gel. And I'm going to get Ben to explain that a little. We are back on. All right. So I just put up there to say my 5 moments of hand hygiene. So if you are in a hospital, we say before touching a patient, which is moment 1, before immediately prep to an aseptic procedure or a clean procedure. Moment 2, moment 3, immediately after contact with body fluids or after a procedure. Moment 4, immediately after touching a patient, being in contact with a patient. And then the moment 5, after touching a patient's environment. But when you're not in an hospital situation, we say always think of, what am I about to do right now? Wash your hands. What have I just done? I've just come from the toilet. I'm going to wash my hands. I'm about to eat. I'm going to wash my hands. I want to feed my baby. I'm going to wash my hands. So it's all those things, but how am I washing my hands? Ben, you did mention something about soap and water, and then you mentioned the alcohol hand rub. People are going to ask, and I think we got this question before, where somebody said, which is better? Is it better to wash our hands with soap and water, or is it better to use the sanitizer or satanizer? So which is better?
Okay.
Because I do have my own response there.
It's a slightly challenging question, actually, to give you, answer to give you. Incidentally, once you've washed your hands, no matter how you do it, liquid soap, water, or alcohol, we know they do not have COVID on them at all, or influenza, or most other pathogens. But the minute you touch a surface that somebody else may have touched, they may be contaminated again. because that other person may have been contaminated. And a surface that more people have touched, then the more likely you are to have that current epidemic outbreak on your hands. So I'm right-handed, for instance. So if I was to get onto a bus and there's a handle, I'd try and not use the handle. If I did, I'd try and use my left little finger because I'm right-handed. If I have a button to push on a phone, public phone, I'd turn my left hand over and use my left hand knuckles to push that phone, or a lift button if there's a lift anywhere about, to reduce the chances of it getting on the inside part of my hand, especially my dominant hand that I'm more likely to have finger food. I just mention that while I think of it. Pin numbers and such like. Try and use your non-dominant hand knuckle to do it. Now, alcohol, liquid soap and water in many ways is ideally best. And it's a little bit of a hard concept to understand, but my skin is like a lawn with grass on it. It's covered with relatively good bacteria. They're part of my innate immune system, and they're my first line of protection to stop the worst bugs getting past that barrier and through to my skin. If I then, for instance, cough into my hand, sitting on top of that lawn of microbes, there'll be the newly arrived COVID virus because I've just coughed into my hand, or I've touched a surface that had influenza or COVID that will be sitting on top of that normal pasture of good bugs on my hands. When I use liquid soap and water, if I do it properly and for long enough, all the newly arrived bugs, the influenza or COVID, will wash off relatively easily in 20 seconds or so. So that's the first point. That is good because it still leaves my pasture of bacteria on my skin to keep working. On the other hand, if I use alcohol instead, alcohol hand rubs instead, or gel instead, that's very quick and it kills nearly all the newly arrived pathogens, but it also kills all my normal, relatively good bugs sitting on my hand surface. So then it actually makes, we're more, the trouble is, especially in hospital situations, it is much quicker to use alcohol hand rubs. When we're really busy, it's quicker and easier to do it. And as humans, we always like to take the easy way out. And so if it's easier to use alcohol, we're more likely to do it. If we've got a process like liquid soap and water that takes longer and we have to do it 100 times a day, we're less likely to do it. So ideally, liquid soap and water is better to my mind, but in practice, especially if we have to do it quite a lot, we're more likely to use alcohol hand rubs because it's so fast and effective. But then because we've got rid with the alcohol, we've got rid of our good lawn of relatively good bugs, it, it potentially makes us more vulnerable for a while. And I must say, if I've used alcohol hand rubs, I tend to give with my freshly cleaned hands, my forehead, for instance, a wipe, and thus re-inoculate my hands with my normal good flora. And because I don't touch touched surfaces with my forehead, I've re-inoculated my hand with those good bugs on the skin of my forehead. I've never told Katina that before. So that's one way of, but because all the rest of my skin has got microbes all the way over it, before long my hands will get recolonized with my normal healthy good flora too. Did you learn
I'm
something
not
there?
gonna comment. I'm not gonna comment on that one because you already know what I'm going to say.
I'll say one other thing too. When we have our normal microbial flora that is left after liquid soap and water, if I wash my, for instance, left hand with liquid soap and water, and I use alcohol with my right hand, so I've killed all the bugs, these bugs fight for their own territory. They're like microscopic animals. And if influenza or COVID then, or the tests have only been done on influenza, I haven't seen them done on COVID. If influenza then goes on my hand that was washed and dried with liquid soap and water, my normal microbes on my skin kill that influenza in about 3 to 5 minutes, but it takes a lot longer before the influenza virus dies on my hand that had alcohol on it.
Uh-huh. I just wanted to add something else there, Ben. I think this is just for the benefit of my fellow brothers and sisters in Africa to say that, like, as we talk about the hand washing, is the most important part of like preventing, especially most infections. And as it happens, when I do training in hospitals, I often tell people that we nurses and doctors were the ones who actually spread bugs around. And the reason is because I touch one patient and I don't wash my hands because I'm wearing gloves. I believe that gloves are protecting me and protecting everybody. All we care about is ourselves. So one thing I just want to highlight to everyone right now is that gloves are not a hand hygiene product. I would trust somebody who comes to touch me with their clean hands than with gloves that I don't know where they've come from. So one of the movement that we're having here in New Zealand, Ben, you'll agree with me. I started this one and it's going well. We say it's okay to ask a healthcare professional to say, "Excuse me, can you wash your hands in front of me, please? Excuse me, doctor, I didn't see you washing your hands before you put on those gloves. Excuse me, nurse, I didn't see you cleaning your hands before wearing those gloves. You just came into my room with gloves on. Where did those gloves come from?" The reason I'm saying this is so that you guys can start knowing that gloves are not a hand hygiene product. And if your hands are heavily soiled or grossly soiled, let's say with norovirus, which is a gastro, and all you have is alcohol, I'll say look for soap and water because I mean, Ben, you would agree with me. This is where I often become quite OCD and say I would wash my hands with soap and water, and then I'll double up and go and do alcohol hand rub again because I
Yep.
just honestly believe hand washing.
Especially gastroenteritis with something like norovirus, which is takes such a tiny number, doing it both ways is ideal. I have to slip in a story here, if I may, Katina. When I was about 23 years old, I had a burst appendix and I was hospitalized. It's called peritonitis. And I was relatively young and wet behind the ears, and surgeons were treated as gods at the time. And so I had the operation on my abdomen to try and clean up the burst appendix. And I was on an open ward with a whole lot of people on it. And I saw the surgeon and his team going from patient to patient. And he didn't wash his hands between any of the patients. And I knew what his infection rate was because I worked in laboratory and it was appalling. And when he got to the edge of my room, my bed, I said, "Excuse me, can I talk to you by yourself for a moment, please?" And he looked a bit affronted and told the rest of his team to go away. I didn't want to offend him and said, "Would you mind washing your hands before you attend to my wound?" And he said, "No, no, boy, I'll just do it very quickly." And he went straight forward to my wound, took the dressing off, and I caught the same infection as everybody else.
Ouch.
Now I am older, wiser, and I utterly would never ever stand for that again. I was hospitalized for another 2 weeks.
And now you are like Katina, where you just go, "Excuse me, can you please wash your hands in front of me?" Because that's the rule.
Absolutely. I agree with it totally. And part of a healthcare worker's training should be, even if they've just done their hand hygiene, to give confidence you should do it in front of the person so they can
That's
see it
right.
before attending. And don't
That's
accept
right.
it. Say, "No, I've just done it." They're either letting themselves off the hook, you want to be certain and have confidence in them.
Show me, show me, show me. So, healthcare professionals out there, you are in Zimbabwe, you are in Africa, wherever you are, this is it. And I think we're going to be coming to Africa doing some of these teachings. And I know there's probably some people already are doing this, but we need to emphasize more on this. Most of our hand hygiene training comes from Australia, but New Zealand were running with this already. Next question, Ben. I'm just gonna move to this. Signor did ask something again, and just bear with me, guys. I'm not ignoring your questions, and I do know some people are becoming anxious. Some become a little bit, quite impatient. Bear with me, go easy on me. And Dr. Ben, also, I believe information from reliable sources suggests that COVID-19 can be transmitted in the airborne. What's your response pertaining to that?
I must have failed. I'm essentially saying that
Yeah, you did mention it before.
most COVID-19 infections are either droplet or airborne. Most
Oh,
of them.
Ben,
Yes.
did you reduce your volume over there?
No, I haven't touched anything. Most. Can you hear that?
Is there anywhere where you can put some volume a little bit more?
I don't think so. No.
Okay,
Has it
all
somehow
right.
gone down? Does it come
Keep
up
going.
again?
You can kiss your string if your screen if you can. But yeah, all right. I can hear
I
you,
get
but I have
close
it's
to the
it's
throat.
not that loud for some reason as well.
I think most COVID infections are caught by breathing the air that somebody else with the infection has breathed out. Most of them. And that the difference between droplet and airborne is splitting hairs. I think they're still airborne or droplet, call it what you will. I know there's differences in the literature on that, but airborne infections are virtually definite. And I'll show you that in some slides coming up. Can you hear that, Katina?
What was that?
So I think I've answered that. Have you got another question or
Yes.
shall I
Yeah,
move
I
on?
can hear you. I thought you were listening to me. I was trying to put up the volume from my screen, from my end here, so I thought you could hear the sounds that I could hear from here.
Right.
I had the response. Yep. If they have any further questions to that, that was Senior there. He will ask another one. But for now, if you want to move on to your masks, what do they stop? What do they do? You were already talking about that.
Okay, what do they do? So where did we have back there? We have homemade one on the left. And that works quite well. The surgical mask, which is a bit fancier, still fairly cheap, and that works a bit better. The one on the left may be from cotton, for instance, homemade, and the one on the right is an expensive N95 mask, which works much better still. One of the risk areas, we can see it clearly on the one on the left, the homemade one, is where the air just at the top of the nose there can easily
Mm.
get down, or just in front of the ear, looks like a bit of a bulging out, the air can get in there. So all three of them stop large droplets fairly well. So if I give a cough down in front of them, the large droplets will be stopped fairly well. But any very fine steam-like, smoke-like droplets will get round the air. So we need to try and push the mask, whichever type it is, fairly closely to our skin on those areas where there looks as though there's a gap. That's the first thing. Now, the risk zones. If the person on the left is coughing, those large red circles are more the equivalent of large droplets. And like a golf ball or a cricket ball, they have more mass and we can throw them further. So the large droplets we can throw or cough quite a long way, a meter or two or three or more. The smaller droplets are more like a ping pong ball, not so much mass in them, and we can't push them so far. Then there's the tiny little specks, which are more like water vapor, and they can go round those gaps on the skin and the mask and they can slowly float away, even across to the window there, to the far side of the room, in much lower numbers, though, in much lower numbers. And that's the key point. If that person um, is not wearing a mask, then the large droplets and the small droplets will go to the far end of the room. If that person is wearing a mask, no matter what the type, nearly all the large droplets with the bulk of the virus will be caught up in that mask. At this point, I just have to say one of the troubles we have with viruses, um, infections, is we cannot see them. And humans tend to respond most, we're emotional beings, we tend to respond most to things that we can see. So when you put on a mask, it looks very clean and might be white or green or other such thing. When you put it on, it looks just the same when you come to take it off. The difference may be if you have been anywhere near somebody that had COVID, when you come to take it off, as I've put on there may be teeming with virus on it because it's working, doing what it's meant to. And I would say it still looks nice and clean, but it is
Mm.
very, very infectious. And we have to take it off very carefully and either dispose of it carefully, or in the case of COVID, if you were to keep that mask for at least 3 days on a top shelf where children can't get hold of it, the COVID virus will die on a soft surface like that, will die over 3 days, at least to a low enough number that it would not pass on infection, even if it was there. So the virus will only last on soft surfaces for a maximum of about 3 days. So if you had 3 masks, you could slowly recycle if you're going to the supermarket and such like. So imagine, and it's not a very nice concept to think of, rather than a nice clean mask you're taking off, imagine that it's totally smeared with feces. You would treat it a lot differently if it was coated with feces to if it just looked quite normal. But if it's covered with virus, that's a lot worse than if it was in fact covered with feces, just by way of example. Okay, so when we wear a mask, virtually no matter what the type, it will stop all those large red droplets. But depending on the type, some of the smaller ones can either go through the mask or around the edges of the mask. And they're like little smoke particles that can go right across to the far side of the room. Notice they're still denser nearer the person breathing or coughing. So think of that person smoking again. The densest smoke is near the person, the lightest smoke is further away. If we open an external door or window, those viral numbers, the air will be diluted out even more and the numbers will be lower. Now, if I spend a short period of time within a meter or two of that person, I'm very likely to get a high enough infectious dose to give me COVID. If I'm at the far side of the room, just under the window there, then it's going to take me a lot longer before I breathe enough virus in to catch COVID infection. So it's a function of distance. Further away I am, the less virus I breathe, but the longer I spend even further away in that room, the more likely I am to get enough virus to give me infection. That's a really key point. And
Mm.
so the question is whether it's airborne or droplet, it's spread by both.
Mm. Okay,
Really,
I
really
hope
key.
that answers your question, Signoro. It's quite a complicated one, but yeah, it's
Well, it's
both.
simple and complicated. Bigger
I
numbers,
know.
nearer to the cougher, and as I explained before, there is an infectious dose. We don't know what it is, but say it was 200. We're going to breathe 200 of those particles fairly fast when we're within 1 to 2 meters of that person. And it's going to take longer to breathe 200 when we're 4 or 5 meters away. If we're outside, we're not going to breathe enough. we're inside, given time, we are going to breathe enough with that person.
All right. Before you proceed, just so you can recap again on the smoking one, somebody's asking here, my Jaden, na Jody, na Jasmine, Hansi, she's saying, sorry, is it true that nicotine is preventing COVID-19? And I think we got this one here in New Zealand too.
My intuitive response will be definitely not. So the cigarette companies have given it as a good excuse to smoke more cigarettes or let
Yep.
rumors of it saying that, steer clear of it. Anything to do with cigarettes is it it's a habit and it's an addiction and it works to destroy your lungs and a significant part of your immune system and your blood system as well. So in general, I'd have to say no, not at all. You could, I'm sure, put nicotine. You could put nicotine in a petri dish, and yes, it quite likely kills COVID virus. Coming back to the whiskey person, we could put whiskey in a petri dish and put COVID in, it would kill that too. But at those concentrations, I think you're more likely to die and or catch COVID if you are a smoker than if you're not a smoker.
Right. This is an interesting one. Okay. Angelina says, Angelina, I'm starting to wonder, are you in the medical field or healthcare? Are you a healthcare worker? You seem to have really interesting questions, which is good, by the way. Sanitizers, she's saying, with many people selling sanitizers nowadays, how do we know that what we're buying is real is real, or what is the best option?
That's a good question. There's actually quite a range of alcohol levels that work. 60 to 75, 80% works best in alcohol hand gels. Interestingly, 100% alcohol does not work as well as when it's diluted out to 60 to 70%. It's a there's a chemical reason for it. The water dissociates the alcohol, and it's dissociated alcohol that works best. As for how well it works, how you know the integrity of that strength, it's never easy. I think we know if it was a water-based product and it had 10% alcohol, then it would not dry very fast on our hands. So the drying rate will give you a good indication of how much alcohol is in that bottle. So if you get a new brand and your hands are still sticky after 40 seconds or still wet after 40 seconds, I'd be starting to think, I think there's not much alcohol in there. That would be my main gauge, I think, how fast it does and or the integrity of the brand that you're buying.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, remember liquid soap and water works just as well, and there are some things to show it works better, slightly more complex reasons it works better, but I accept, especially if you're in the health field, it's easier to use alcohol, it's much quicker, and you can attend to more patients in that time. But the rate of evaporation would be a good indication. A good question, thank you.
All right.
The
Thank you for
integrity
that.
of
And
Mhm.
you were saying?
And the integrity of that brand and or supply chain too.
Yep. I won't mention my favorite brand here in New Zealand because definitely in Africa it'll be like we can afford it. But the other question here, oh no, you've already answered this one. She was just asking if we could go back to your question, but she says there's been a study in France that has proved that nicotine yeah, she says, has my question been answered before I came, Katina? Please advise. The question is it true that nicotine is helping in the prevention of COVID-19? You've already answered, Ben, but she says there's a study. Did you hear about that?
There's many, many studies, and some of them quite a number of them actually are now no longer peer reviewed to get them out in a hurry. And I'm not
Mm,
saying that it definitely doesn't work, but I think it is unlikely that it works. And sometimes you have to look at who funded the study, and you find that somebody was paid rather a lot to give a result that a
exactly.
cigarette may. Now, I'm not saying that's, I cannot say categorically that it doesn't, but any of the smoking risks or the other related risks, it tends to make people more predisposed to it, not less. And smaller studies are riskier. Knowing who funded them and how well peer reviewed it was before it was published are all important. So it's possible you're right, uh, but I think it is unlikely. And the risks in the longer term are going to be much greater from being a smoker than a non smoker.
Yeah, and I think we did have here in New Zealand, Ben. Remember how people were saying that um, if you're a
Can
smoker,
I
you are
slip
at
in
more
something?
risk.
Can I slip in something there? In Italy, there's, and I was there about uh, 6, 7 years ago, and it seemed as though 80% of the population were smokers, and they were hit really, really hard with COVID-19. And that was one of the thoughts at one stage. Was it because there are so many smokers that it makes them more predisposed to COVID? So I just slipped that in as well. Sorry, you were saying, Katina.
No, that's all right. I just remembered when we had a discussion about smoking, when I say that I wonder if smokers are going to be dying from COVID-19 more than people who are non-smokers. And what came out of that, I think uh, people have done studies where they realize that as it happens, it's not related at all. But that doesn't mean that we have to promote smoking, knowing all the other risks that are related to smoking. Obviously, we know, the side effects that go along with smoking. So it's not something that I would probably be promoting myself.
But believe me, the cigarette company manufacturers will create any information at all and target leaders and in the industrialized world, all our advertisements used to be airline pilots on glossy magazines with showing their captain's rings and such like. They're just advertisements saying most airline pilots or most doctors prefer to smoke whatever the brand was. It's all absolute
Yeah.
rubbish. And they're trying to, and they've done it very, very well, increase the smoking rates in your country and many, many others. Don't feed the cigarette company manufacturers. Don't be sucked in by them.
Yeah,
They're
that's right.
very,
I hope that answers you.
very, very clever.
I hope that answers you, my Jaden. No, we had not answered your question before. Actually, I was going through all the questions. But Ben, just to agree with you, I think you did mention this afternoon that like this COVID-19 has brought in a lot of social and political disruption in the whole world, really. Not just in New Zealand. We know what happened here in New Zealand, even though we have 0 cases at the moment. There was a lot of disruption and it's still ongoing. So it's something that, uh, you know,
And it's going
yeah.
to go on like that for another 3 to 5 years anyway. The social and business disruption will be huge. But the fear is actually bigger than and the disruption is larger than the disease itself.
Yeah, okay, I'll let you proceed.
Okay. There's just out of interest, there's the structure of the COVID virus, and it's got all these different names on it. But the key one really is the spike protein. Looks like a dart on the outside, because it's that spike protein. We never get an infection just by a bug being there. And the spike protein, we only get it when the microbe, bacterial virus, attaches to a skin cell in humans, for instance. And the different cells in different parts of the body and different bugs only attach to different sites. That spike protein is key for the COVID-19 attachment and causing an infection. And that can only attach to to cells in humans that have what's called an ACE2 protein, angiotensin converting enzyme number 2. So down the bottom of that picture, it's got human cell with a blue type color ACET protein as part of the cell. And the spike protein, and now it's changed over to pink, the spike protein has to attach to an ACE2 protein before it can start causing an infection. I just say that now because those ACET proteins are only in the upper respiratory tract, the lower respiratory tract, and or primarily only in the upper lower respiratory tract, so the lungs and the nose and throat, and also in the bowel. So that's where the bulk of infection is localized. Oops, I've gone the wrong way. So when we cough, if there's no, as I described before, or sneeze, the large droplets go the farthest, up to 6 meters there. There you go. The smaller droplets are lighter and don't go so far. But the very small droplets, they go down into our lung. They go down to the lung. Now, the little person on the right there, they're coughing. They don't have a mask. The large droplets, they have a diameter of what happens to be called 10 microns or more, 10 micrometers or more. And bacteria are about 1 to 4 microns in size. So these large droplets are a lot larger than that again. And they mainly get caught up in the upper respiratory tract. You can see the large droplets up there, the hairs in our upper respiratory tract in the corners, they get stuck on those. The smaller droplets only go down into the lung. The large ones get caught up. Remembering, large droplets are relatively easily stopped by a mask. Relatively easily stopped by a mask, whether it's a surgical mask or a homemade one. Only the very small droplets are stopped by the much more expensive N95 masks. So we have here on the left somebody coughing, in the purple there, coughing, and the person on the left wearing a mask. Now, this is slightly hard to understand, but if a reference range of 100 is used, you can see a tea cloth stops 3/4 of them, stops over 77 of them getting through, but 33 of them, of the particles, still get through that mask. Surgical mask is a bit more effective still, but the expensive N95 mask, only one particle gets through. So that's safer. Every type of mask reduces risk. It doesn't guarantee stopping it. That's on the viruses going into the person who's trying to protect himself, who does not have the infection. On the picture on the right, the person there has the infection, is wearing a mask, and they are coughing. And we know in that case that using a reference value of 100, that the tea cloth or the handmade one only stops 10 out of 100 particles getting out. The rest go out because we've got a lot more force when we're coughing with a mask just very nearby. And the surgical mask stops half of them, and the expensive mask stops 70% of them. Now, the best way then is for the person with infection to be wearing a mask, whether they have symptoms or not, so they may not know they've got infection, and the person walking, sharing the air with others, especially inside any building, they're best to wear a mask as well, so doubling the protection. I just put this one up. On the left-hand side, you'll see nasopharynx with a bar, a blue color, and then below that a smaller bar, bronchi, which is in the lung, and smaller still further down in the lung is the alveoli. Those bars represent where the most ACE2 receptor sites are, and the more sites we have is where the virus, the COVID virus, is most likely to attach to, so that's the risk. So all these different masks there. Notice the one two lines down and two in, two rows down and two in. It's got a little valve on the front of it. So it's a very good mask. It's an N95 mask, and that protects that person totally, because almost totally, when they breathe in, the valve on the front, that white circle on the front, snaps shut, and so all the air being breathed in is filtered. And but when they breathe out, it's very easy to breathe out because the valve opens and the air comes straight out. But if that person in fact had COVID virus, it would be no protection at all to anybody around them. It goes straight out. So although it was easier for them to breathe, it only protects them and it's no protection at all to others. Even things like, here's you can see where the gaps are on the left of this mask, and it may or may not have been homemade, but looks like a surgical mask. Even if you wrap a stocking sheet around it, as is on the right, that increases the filtering capacity just because it closes off the air gaps around the nose and in front of the ear. It helps reduce air in that. So anything that reduces those air gaps can improve the efficiency of the mask. Um,
Ben, whilst you're on the masks, maybe in
yeah.
case you want to add something else, there's somebody who just joined us now, Faith Mtandwa here. She says, Katina, if this has already been addressed, please disregard. Yes, we have, but I think the question about masks will keep coming. It can come in a different form. She says, what is the most effective type of mask to be used by a host in workshops or training settings? And how often should we be changing surgical masks?
Okay. The
Two questions there.
homemade mask has some effect, as I showed you before. That's ordinary linen cloth mask, homemade, but try and shape it to your face as well as possible. That's the cheapest, of course, you're making it at home. The surgical mask in general, and you have to do the translation, container will be 20 or 30 cents in the likes of New Zealand. And they work sort of half to two-thirds well. And an N95, also known as a P2 mask, they work at around 99% effective. So they're much better still, but they're $8 New Zealand to $18 compared to 25 to 30 cents each. Now, depending on where you're working, you can get other mask types. You can look it up on the internet that when you said workshops and such like, if it's chemicals that need to be filtered out, you can get other masks that also filter chemicals as well and or other particles. Um, if you're in surgery, if it's a hospital you're primarily wanting to stop splashes, and you can have a different mask at all that doesn't get wet, so it's waterproof. So it's a different type of surgical mask. How long do you wear them for? To a certain extent, depends on how many you've got in a supply. And what's challenged the whole world is ideally, everybody in the world will be wearing N95 masks, and there's nowhere near enough of them in any country. The United States has run out, and they've hoovered up or bought all the N95 masks in the world, basically. Ideally, you change a mask when it gets damp or wet, uh, and that depends on the air humidity at the time. But ideally, we change it when the mask gets wet. I do point out, if you're reusing, which I touched on before, if you're reusing your own mask, and I'll come back on why, if you're reusing your own mask because the main risk at the moment is COVID-19, for instance, or influenza, then when you take it off, because it's getting damp or end of the day or other reason, if you put it very carefully into some form of container, a paper bag, for instance, preferably not plastic bag, except for short distances, because plastic bag does not breathe. And if that paper mask or N95 mask dries out, then that's good. And the infectious dose of COVID-19 will die over about 3 days. So, as a second best option, put it in a bag, take it home, and put it on a top shelf where children can't get hold of it. If you had three of those masks and recycled them every 3 days around you, that would be right if you have no other illness. Why we don't put them all in a bag and mix them up and reuse everyone else's in 3 days is if anybody had TB bacteria, TB infection, lung infection, and often we won't know if they've got it or not. There's 10 million new cases a year. Then TB bacteria, unlike COVID and influenza virus, will happily live for a year, no trouble at all, and it would increase the risk dramatically if you wore someone else's mask that had had TB, for instance.
Mm. Mm.
Just being practical.
Awesome.
Also, 70
Hmm.
degrees, 70 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes or so will kill COVID virus quite effectively.
And
Oh,
just to add on to that, I think knowing how the situation is like in Zimbabwe and just in Africa in general, I mean, it's not easy for me to actually say, hey guys, the N95 is the most effective. We all know that. But it's also the most expensive. Even myself here in New Zealand, we ran out of them, even for those who could afford them. But at the same time, what we try to encourage people, especially on programs like this, is to say we have to find something that is, you know, cost effective. But to start with, is it practical? What we are advising you to do, it has to be practical, it has to be affordable, but it also has to be simple. So if making a homemade mask is something that you are able to do, understand how to use it properly so that it can be effective. So when it comes to infection prevention and control, one thing I emphasize on is whatever I encourage you to do, I ask you to do, or I advise you to do, it has to be simple, it has to be effective, and it has to be practical. So, homemade mask, if that's what you can afford, and we see most Africans, they are coming up with their own masks. You heard from Ben how you can make it work, and it has to be tight fitting and suit the purpose that you're using it for. So, hope that answers it. You can move on, Ben.
thank you. I couldn't agree more with what you've said. Then you have to do it. That's the last point. Simple, practical, effect, and you have to do it. I know.
Right. Okay, I'll add that to my next presentation.
Then, of course, just re-going what I've said overall is that most, like influenza, COVID, um, possibly most people that have it will have no symptoms at all, but still be able to pass it on to others. So the rule of thumb is the more air you share of other people in an enclosed space or in a building, the more likely you are to catch it and pass it on. Most people that have it will not go to a GP, they'll be at home. Only a small number go on to a health centre or a general practitioner, and even smaller number still. Uh, so we're only ever looking at the tip of the iceberg. The bulk of them will be unknown, and people will never know they had it. With testing, just to be clear, a negative swab test never rules out COVID-19. It often does not pick up patients even when they definitely have it. Now,
Mm,
this study here I'm showing is different studies show different things, and this was a earlier one from China, and where they've had the most experience, don't forget, and they showed that a thing called a bronchoalveolar lavage is when you put a plastic tube down into somebody's lung and squirt some water or saline into the lung, then suck it up and test it. Even those that were known to have COVID have missed 7 out of 100 of them, whereas nasal swabs that missed almost 40 out of 100 positives. So a negative swab never rules it out. We don't always know why. Maybe it's how well the specimen was collected. Maybe the virus was at one site but not at another site. But an, a positive result is very likely to be COVID, but there can be errors in the test, but a negative result never rules it out. And some people that have had it have to be tested 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 days in a row before it becomes positive, even when they've had symptoms all the way through. Looking here at that red line going up and over and that pyramid type shape, we can have the virus for up to 6 days before we get any symptoms at all and still be passing it on to others. Then when we get symptoms, it's day naught on the bottom there, we can then be suspecting it, but the symptoms might be very mild, and then eventually that goes, the symptoms clear up, and only then does the blood test antibodies start coming up. So when we look back, we may be able to tell somebody had COVID, but the blood test is no help at all for COVID in diagnosis, or very little
Mm.
help, because we don't get the antibodies till afterwards, measurable antibodies until afterwards. Make that part clear, which is somewhat similar to influenza. The red line is the actual influenza viral numbers, and the white yellow line is when the symptoms come. So we've got the most virus just before we get any symptoms at all, and you and people around you do not know that you've got it, and then it tails off over time. So, and here's the two ones on the left are the actual virus. They go up and down, and they may or may not be detected by a swab test. And then we have the blood test, the antibodies IgG and IgM start after the event. And how long they last for is a critical question we need to know more about. We know that once we started growing vegetables, then we know we're no longer hunter gatherers. And excuse me, I'm going to have a we excuse me, we
COVID
were no longer
19.
COVID-19. It may well be. Um, we know that hunter gatherers used to be in pods of 15 or 20 people. Once they learnt to grow vegetables 10,000 years or so ago, then they started coming to villages and they started clearing the bush. And when the bush was cleared, the mosquitoes that normally ate drew blood from apes and such like, and the bats, they were forced into a smaller and smaller space. They then had to come out and start biting humans and having more contact with humans. And that's where many of our infectious disease started from us changing our environment. Those villages grew into huge cities, and we had air travel between them, and so the world got more and more joined up, which spread them ever more. We're seeing just how fast for something like COVID. COVID most likely came from bats, almost definitely came from bats. They have many, many different strains of coronavirus as part of their normal microbial flora. And only occasionally do some come out and mutate enough to get into humans. In this case, they may or may not have gone through an intermediate animal like a pangolin, which is an anteater, but they probably or may well have come from what's called wet markets in China, where there's a lot of wild meat and game, and a lot of people in there. And here we see all these wild markets. So quite often the influenzas and these other um, uh, epidemic or pandemics come from the wet markets. If I can use the analogy, and it may be a little bit hard to comprehend, but the wet market is a little bit like us walking around in a community, say in Africa, where we know there's COVID virus, and then going into a hospital that happens to have none, or a rest home that happens to have no COVID virus, and taking it into there. It's that same sort of analogy. It crosses over a boundary. So, COVID-19, we know there's no treatment as such. There is one remdesivir which may reduce the actual infection symptoms by a few days. But the United States have bought all of that up around the world. No one else can buy any. They've bought a lot. Then what do we do? Do we use, for instance, an Australian approach, or even more still, a New Zealand approach, where we wiped it out in the community, and we've done extraordinarily well. But ironically now, we remain totally vulnerable because nobody has, or almost nobody has any immunity to it. So we remain totally vulnerable until such time as a vaccine may or may not become available and may or may not be effective. Australia tried to wipe it out, now it's got away, so they're having another surge. The United States has been a let it go, and it has, and it seems horrific because there's 1,000 a day dying and such like, which seems, and it is horrific. But at the end of 3 years, perhaps the same total number of people will have died, either in a short period or spread over 3 years. We just don't know. And in Sweden, they've gone somewhere halfway in between. We don't know what the right way is. There are many things still that we know lots about COVID, and there are many more things to learn. The interaction between the COVID virus and us, that real hypersensitivity reaction, why some people get it even more than others. How is this epidemic going to evolve? When will it reach its peak? Is it not going to peak in Africa? It started coming up again, or it's just dropping again in South Africa. They got a lot more, but it's wealthier. Is there epidemic there because they've had more money per individual on average? So they've used more medicines for the last 50 years on average. So that may have ironically weakened their immune system. We don't know because many people in Africa have not had medicines. It's just possible, I'm not saying probable, it's just possible their immune system has been less damaged by all these medicines. It's just possible, time will tell, they may not get in Africa. You may not get as many peak numbers as the rest of the world has got. It's certainly going a lot slower in Africa than it has in the rest of the world. There may or may not be a reason for it. The waves that come, unlike influenza, at the moment, the COVID virus mutates about 1/6 of the speed of seasonal influenza. So at the moment, it's relatively stable. It is mutating, but really quite slowly. So the new waves or outbreaks that we get are basically primarily only because of our behaviors. When everyone feels comfortable, COVID's gone, they all go out and socialize and party, party, party. And if there is a little bit of COVID there, it spreads like wildfire. The numbers come up, everyone gets frightened, and they're either told to stay isolated or they don't want to get it and they remain isolated, so the numbers come down again. And it's party, 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 and away it goes. So at the moment, the waves or outbreaks belong to human behavior, our reaction to it. Does infection confer or give us immunity, and for how long? Because nobody's caught it twice after 7 months, we know at least immunity lasts 7 months, but we hope it's longer. It may or may not be. Vaccines, there's some quite promising ones just starting to go into their final phase of trials, really quite promising. But if we really had a good vaccine that worked for all age groups, remembering influenza vaccine in an average year is only 60% effective for under 65-year-olds in an average year, and only about 20% effective for over 65-year-olds. That would not be at all good for COVID because most of the deaths are in the over 65-year-olds. How many doses would we need? How often? Would you have to do it annually or not? And if it suddenly became available now, if it was an injection, we haven't got 8 billion syringes in the world, nor 8 billion needles in the world, nor 8 billion glass vials in the world. And so there's supply issues, and then who pays for it? And there's various bodies in the world looking at trying to share it fairly amongst all nations, not just those that can buy it. But we know the United States will buy and pay for their population before anyone else's. That's the way of the world, right or wrongly. And treatments may or may not come as well. So I say not wiping hands, like shaking your hand, not washing your hands or hygiening your hands is like shaking hands with a
Ben,
toilet. Yes.
not so fast. You do know that nearly each time you talk about vaccines, I
Oh,
think it's always good to kind of like elaborate on, the most controversial issue that we had in the last few months was how we had all these Americans and people trying to test the vaccine in Africa. We don't have that many cases like as compared to Italy, China, and America, right? But then why would anybody want to test the vaccine in Africa? So you heard me saying we are not guinea pigs, and I think I went quite wild about that here in New Zealand. So as people are, I know nobody has asked that question yet, but we've got more people watching during this time than before. If you could just elaborate on what you mean by, okay, we want vaccines that are safe, effective, but for how long we don't know. Do we really need a vaccine? Do we really need to test the vaccine in Africa? Well, I'm going to say this on
okay.
behalf of Africans. Why not guinea
Okay.
pigs?
No one wants to be a guinea pig. And from my understanding, Africa has been most likely involved in some shameful um, guinea pig testing in Africa when it probably didn't need to be at all. And so it is going to be, and that's a shameful experience also that's been done by some major companies in the industrialized world. However, in general, for vaccines, as we've seen, different populations, for reasons not fully understood, whether it's what they eat or their behaviors or how close they are to the equator or not, have had really different responses to catching COVID-19 as an infection. In the ideal world, when you're wanting to test a vaccine to see if it works or not in any given population, you want to test a population that has rapidly increasing numbers of that infection. So you may take, say, any city X, I'll call it,
Mm-hmm.
and it may have 100,000 people, and COVID's just starting to increase, and you want to see if the vaccine works in city X's um, population. So you take 20,000 people, and 10,000 of them uh, you give an injection with some sterile water, and they don't know it, and the person injecting them doesn't know it, but they all agree to sign up to the. It's an ethical requirement to sign up to the trial, and the
Mm.
other 10,000 are injected with this vaccine that's been through earlier trials and it seems to be safe for humans. Only then do you know, after 6 months, because it was rapidly increasing case numbers in the city X, that with those that were vaccinated in that particular population group, did it reduce their chances greatly compared and safely compared to those that were not vaccinated in that particular population group. So really it ideally wants to be sampled in many different populations and races around the world to have a better understanding. Because if, for instance, it worked really well in one country, but the same vaccine not very well in another, that informs us there's something different, and we have to work and try and find out what it is. So, as for do we really need a vaccine or not, if it came soon enough and it was effective, and I think ideally 98% effective, like measles vaccine, and
Mm-hmm.
98% effective in those most vulnerable, which is the over 63-year-olds that have an underlying illness. So is it effective for them? Is it safe? How long does it work for? How long do we keep immunity? Is it like measles where it lasts for life? Or do we have to have a new shot every year or 2 years? And how many doses need to be given? All those are key questions. If we use no vaccine, if vaccine works, say for COVID or measles, if I use the example of measles, if we did not vaccinate the population, there's something
Mm.
nice about the thought that natural immunity would be better, and often natural immunity lasts longer. But it's nice to think, oh, we should be tough enough. We can do without the measles vaccine, but it's got a really large death rate and maiming rate as a result.
Yeah.
For example, smallpox. We vaccinated, it's the first human mass disease that's ever been purposely got rid of in the world. Smallpox, the last case, I think, was 1980, or that's when the world was declared. Last case might have been 1978, but the world was declared smallpox free in 1980. No new cases for 2 years. Up until between 1900 and 1980, there was 300 million to 500 million deaths in the world from smallpox alone. The vaccine has now stopped any deaths from smallpox forevermore.
Thanks for
They,
that, Ben.
Mhm.
Yeah. I wanted to say, with the numbers you're mentioning there, I can't compare COVID-19 to anything like smallpox or even the measles or the polio. I mean, if we talk about COVID-19, the race at the moment, people are anxious, and everyone, the moment they hear the thousands and the hundreds and everything, were panicking. But if we compare with the numbers that you've mentioned right now, personally, I would say that we are far from matching with any of those other pandemics we've had in the past.
Totally, I agree. And that's why I say perspectives. And even in the last 20 years, and just to repeat those, the total death rate from COVID is like a bad influenza year. It may be 0.3%, 3 per 1,000 that die from it. And they're mainly people that would have died within the 12 months anyway. There are always exceptions, and absolute numbers is different to percentage numbers. So, as I said, 100,000 people in the United States dying, and now up to about 330,000, 130,000, but each 100,000 is 0.03% of their population. So percentages give a better indication, I think. And if COVID was about 0.3% total population, many of them would have died anyway within 12 months. Then compared to SARS, which was 10%, and many times higher, and that was 1992, 2002, I think it was, compared to Middle East respiratory syndrome, which was 38%, 380 per thousand, compared to the bird flu H5N1, which is something like 56, 58 percent, or 580 per thousand. This is nothing in comparison. However, if there was a safe vaccine available and it was very effective, and you had a child or a family member who happened to be one of those that was younger, had no underlying conditions, and died, you'd have to think, oh, I wonder if I should have vaccinated them. And that's always the catch.
Yep. Ben,
Yes.
oh, did you have something else to say? Yep.
No, that's fine. Thank you. You told me not to go
I
so fast. Go back on the back, and that's a really good point. Thank you. To
You will shake hands with a toilet. Okay. What
yep.
I was gonna ask is how long do you wanna go for? Because
I'm about at the
what
end,
I
I
was
think. So
you're close to the end
2020.
because what I wanted to say is we've been going for 2 hours 34 minutes, and
Wow.
what I was gonna ask us to do is to say, oh yeah, because we've only just started doing these programs, guys. For those who are watching, we want to try and make this as interactive and as useful as possible. I know we're loading you with a lot of information at the moment, but what we're going to be doing is see which commonly asked questions are becoming quite popular here, like the sessions that we've done so far, and then we'll be cutting the sessions so short so that like people can benefit from just tune into the link that would have shared or Facebook post and learn about mask. And we do one on maybe vitamin D, we do one on nicotine, we do one on whatever, just short ones like those. But at the moment, we're trying to see just to get the gist of like what are the most commonly asked questions, and it's really been interesting. um if you want to keep going, Ben, you can, but I think we're gonna give ourselves up to like maybe the next 25 minutes. We need to cut down this video. I mean, if you want to go on, I don't mind, but I'll go grab my dinner.
I've just come to the end of the line, really. I'll just lighten up.
Okay.
That's social distancing.
Yeah.
That's the power of social distancing. So if each person, if the row value, the transmission value was 2.5, and we use the top row there, one person would pass it on to 2.5 others,
Hmm.
and in a month, that would be 406 people infected. If they had half the exposure because they kept away from crowded areas and or wore a mask, then rather than 2.5 people, they may only on average infect 1.25 people, and see the difference in 30 days. Only 15 people are infected. And whereas on the bottom one person, they wore a mask and nearly always stayed isolated at home, only 3 people get passed on. Now, after a year, the same total number may have come down, but that top one, it's very, very hard for a community to manage it, the hospitals and such like. And so that's the main point there. Social distancing works, slow down the rate of a pandemic rather than stop it completely. So now, yep, that's all my talk really. I've just got some lighten up ones at the end of a talk. Swiss wisdom, life has holes. It's how we get through the holes. I rather like, and this is a Swiss cheese with the holes and the nail one. Uh, this one I rather like. Do not be the risk yourself. Follow the guidelines. So, preferably, if you haven't got severe asthma, wear a mask and don't share the air with others too much, and it'll slow down the rate of spread. Um, it may or may not appeal to African humour. I don't know. May not appeal to New Zealand humour either. But the milk there, you'll see, is somehow meant to represent Swiss cheese.
A whole milk.
Whole milk. It's meant to be a pun, but it may or may not be.
Right.
And
Okay.
you
Uh-huh.
never know where someone else's hands have been, what they've touched, and so that may be passing a transmission route to be aware of. Don't be pessimistic. As Katina just pointed out, in perspective, it's tiny compared to the smallpoxes and the measles and everything else. But even that quite small amount has really stopped many businesses and driven fair and social issues way beyond what they should have been, really, in spite of the total numbers. We want to grow old happily and gracefully, not utterly glum like these two. And it says happy anniversary above, and they look anything but happy. It's been a long
That's
enough
you, Ben.
time.
That looks like you.
That's me. And wisdom but grumpy. And we want clear horizons, and I hope that doesn't offend anyone. Clear
That
horizons.
will be me. That will be
That'll
me.
be you. All right. I don't think you'll be marathon running if that's you. And maybe ignorance is bliss. At least that little fellow looks happy. But thank you very much for your attendance. But I'll happily take any more questions within the time. But
Right. I am just going to look at my phone right now, and we've got time, which is good. So, just to let people know, okay, I think Ben needs to hear this one. Those are dead. They're dead, as in like dead, daddy, dead jokes, Ben. But what I wanted to say to you guys is that we already had a session this afternoon where we did a similar slideshow. Ben, I think you did it differently this time. I have to say, people have to go back to the afternoon one to capture some of the things that we discussed this afternoon, which was quite interesting. But what I'm going to do from here is, because we've done 2.5 hours this afternoon and this is like nearly 3 hours now, we're going to go through the slides, and we'll check to see the kind of questions people asked, and we're going to combine all the questions and come and do a live specifically just to respond to those questions and nothing else, and any other questions, not a slideshow. I am going to ring this lady. I don't know if you want to say anything else. I'm looking for this lady's number. I asked her to text me.
very happy for you to
Okay.
email me, or that's probably the
I
easiest. Just
calling.
remember,
Okay.
hours are different in New Zealand too, and I'm reasonably caught up at meetings tomorrow from, I think, midday onwards.
Well, the time differences, guys. And Ben, you are your own person. Where is the afternoon one? The afternoon one, Faith Mtando, you'll find it. It was on YouTube, but I've shared it on my Facebook as well. I don't know where you're watching from. You're watching from Facebook. If you go to my advocate page, I've already shared that one, but I'm going to share it below this one as well so that people can see. But it was quite interesting questions, Ben. We didn't get to discuss the vitamin D and everything, but we discussed it this afternoon, and we are going to discuss all these things again tomorrow, including some of the questions that have already been asked through the radio station. And we will also be taking all this information. Once we know what exactly people want to know in Africa, we will be taking it to the Radio 54 African Panorama Live Radio, and I'll be talking to Ben and translating to Ndebele and Shona, just so that our grandparents and everyone else who can't understand English can understand what this COVID-19 is all about and what it means. Just so you know, don't panic if you've been diagnosed COVID-19 positive. That's all I want to tell you. And for those who didn't know, I actually had a case in my own house during the time when we're on lockdown in New Zealand, and I'm going to be sharing my story with you guys as well. And that's a testimony actually to try and hopefully encourage people to say, hey, being COVID-19 positive is not the end of the world. Have you got any underlying conditions? If you don't, then stick to.
People that have had it are wonderfully protected. It's and the vast majority of people that get it recover unless they've got significant age and or significant underlying illness. But if you've had it, fantastic, you've got immunity. Probably most
Yeah.
people in
Okay.
your
So,
household
guys,
have
the
immunity.
instruction. Oh yeah, I tested negative, but I don't think it was meant to be negative because I mean, come on, I live with the person here, and we cough
I,
on each other and everything. I actually think I had it as well.
I agree. Remembering a negative result never rules out COVID, and it may miss a third to a half of the actual cases. So I agree. You've most likely had it as well, Katina. You shared the house um, with your children, and you've probably all had it. In actual fact, you've shared a lot of air.
I think so. I
Yep.
believe so. I know so. Even though nobody had symptoms. Even the person who tested positive didn't have symptoms. They just got
Most
tested because
people,
their school was the biggest cluster.
yeah, that's right. Most
Okay.
of those people
Yeah.
will not have symptoms. I think I may have had it too. I never get ill, and I had a gland below my right ear on my jaw, and it came up very fast. Stayed up for
Oh,
2 or
you
3
didn't
weeks.
tell me that.
No, no, and it went down again. And
I'm gonna get you to tell people about your WEM story. Not today, though. You infect Africa with your no thanks.
yeah, that's a microbiome story. Yes.
Oh Lord, help us. May you be delivered from the worm story in Jesus' name. Oh my goodness. Uh, okay. So guys, the reason why I ask people to okay, to text me or WhatsApp me is because it's easier for me to actually, when you send me a message on my public number, I can just add you and forward it. And what I'm noticing is that Nyasha Chipare, is that a Zimbabwean number or is that a South African? I don't know numbers. Like if you don't put the code, is that 00263 or is that 0027? Are you in Zimbabwe or are you in South Africa? I don't know the numbers, man. Like honestly, like I just put 263 here and it's saying you're not on WhatsApp. So if you're in Zimbabwe, it's hard for us to call you directly. We have to use WhatsApp. But if you're in South Africa, yes, I personally I can call you directly if you're in South Africa, because South Africa is easy to call from New Zealand. But Zimbabwe, it help me, Katina, for my English. Yeah, I will do that. So she wants to call in. Maybe we'll do this after the phone call. And there's someone else. Oh, is that UK? Are you on WhatsApp? Okay, can you text me, please, just so it's easier? Like the reason I ask people to text me so that I don't have these awkward moments where I'm typing somebody's number. I can just find the number here. Wow. Okay. Just send me a WhatsApp message and then we'll call you back with Ben right now. Otherwise, I mean, the reason we just want you to ask us your questions and I can translate post everyone can hear is so that in case there's more people who wanted to ask the same question, we know there's a lot of panic around the world, especially from Zimbabweans. Ben, there was a question about steaming last time. Can you just say something about that? We still have a few minutes. We had this
Steaming, did you say?
movement that was going on social media, especially from my fellow Zimbabweans. Steaming for COVID-19. Yeah, steaming. Yeah, just
Steam baths. Steam baths. Was that steam baths?
yeah, that's the one.
Yep. Um, to my mind,
Yeah,
steam baths, if they were shared group ones, it's more likely to share the virus. If you're having it with other, if you're steaming with 6 or 10 other people in a village or town or something, you're more likely to be sharing and spreading the virus. You're sharing their air in a relatively close, confined space. And so I would not say it has any benefit at all in reducing COVID virus and actually increasing the risk.
Okay. And
You're not
this
going to
afternoon we
sweat
had
it out.
somebody ask.
You're not going to, sorry to interrupt, you're not going to get it sweated out of your
Yeah.
pores to get rid of it, is what I'm saying. And it may seem like a good idea, but it won't work. Next question.
Okay, Ben. Uh, I'm not asking you any more questions. I'm actually exhausted myself and I just want to go and eat dinner. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this lady and see how this phone call goes. And we still have about 13 minutes. I'm not going to keep it for too long. I know there's someone else who wanted to talk to you, but I know that that gentleman, once he calls, he won't stop. So I'm going to take one call and see how that goes. And if this works, we're going to start doing phone calls in on our next sessions. See if that works better because I know you like answering questions and I quite like that as well, that interactive and all
Yeah.
right, I'm gonna call
But
you
we
now.
also
I hope it will
have
be clear.
people have people text in or email, whatever else,
Ben,
what they would like more of or less of. WhatsApp, whatever, what they'd like more of or less of. It's good for us to have.
Yes. Hello. People who are on the comment section, can you let us know if you can hear us, please? Ben, can you hear that?
I could just hear it in the background. I may try putting a.
You can. No, you have to keep quiet when she's talking, Ben, because this StreamYard only allows one person to talk at a time.
Yes, I'm just going to put on some headphones.
I'm not saying anything.
Just hold on. Okay, so I've got Nyasha Chipare here. She was on the comment section. She had quite a lot of questions to ask. So I'll do the translation where she needs translation, but if she can speak, that'll be awesome. But I'm happy to translate. So Nyasha, I've got Ben is here and he is happy to answer your questions. Maswera say, how are you? Ndiribo.
Yeah, ndine mubvunzo wandinawo inini since my life handina kugara ndasimuka saka aspectwa nesmoking sometimes nditofira kuda kutofa handipafurani pane munhu anosimuka kana tizvizvi kana ndakagara mumba ndakatombomira kushanda iko zvino saka ndakagara mumba ndiri mumba kudai so vanhu ndikavhura mawindow kuti mhepo ipinde vanhu vakasimuka zimwe yayoyo ukapinda mumba handikwanisi kubhiridha saka nditova nemainehila handi kutoshandisa izvezvi so two kana vanhu ane mapefim ari strong handigoni kumafema kuti ayo anondipa kuti ndikosore saka people don't understand ngokosora kwandinge ndichiita vanhu vanobva vafunga kuti pamwe ndine covid19 yachona iyoyo but ndinowadza kuti no mweya westefim uri strong kwandiri smoking iri strong kwandiri kana ndikapinda mba mune tsvina ndinonhuhwa ndinokosora futi same ndinokosora futi tikapinda mabhazi vanhu havagezi vanogona kugeza kati hembe dzavo dzetsinwa tsvina zvokuti bhazi rinenge richinwa tsvina zvokuti inochinzwa kuti haugoni kana kufema kana mhepo unoda pane hwindo unofema uri pane hwindo so saka inini ndandichiti kuna beni dai angaudza vanhu kuti vanhu ngavakwanise kutsvaira dzimba dzavo mumba mogara muri smart muchismela nesmell iri right fresh iri right then after that vanhu vogeza kwete kuti muti anonzi vageze maoko chete vanhu ngavageze nenhumbi dzavo ngadzigezwe.
Right. Pause.
manje kuti chirwere chatinacho chirwere what kind of chirwere because tasikatomborware since all years tasikatomborware but because I think people too much people vari kusimuka so I think maybe sometimes iyo corona iyo inogona kuti corona pamwe kukonzerwa nesmoking because vana vadiki from 16 17 nezanisa kusimuka vana grade vana mbuya vana sekuru vese vakadaro vanenge chichikwata chiposimuka so I think few people vasingasmokeka saka I think takuaffectwa vanhu vese vanhu vopo ndatombochifunza ndega ndikatombobvunza vanhu vangati why these days vanhu vese takungonzi tine asima handina kunokwenda kuna munhu ane asima but ndakutongonzi tine asima ende vanhu nevana vadiki vatongwa nemanehila tese tatongwa nemanehila zvokonzerwa nei ende disease rodo richazopera sei.
Yeah. Okay. Nimbo, let me translate to Ben just for a little while. I'm just going to put you down for a bit. You just listen and did it. So Ben, yeah, you could hear she had a lot to say.
Yes.
All right. I took a few notes here. As you know, I like writing things down. Okay, right. She says, I'll start with her problem first. Her problems, and then we'll come to his recommendations and and then more questions for you. Okay. So she. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Tapabat. All right. So she has never smoked. She has never drunk alcohol. but she gets affected so much that she can't breathe whenever somebody passes, like if she comes across somebody who is smoking. Okay, so so much that she's ended up using inhalers. Take note of that. I know you can keep points better than me. And then she gets affected by strong perfumes, like, how I like smelling nice, and then so many times when I walk into places, people think, that's too strong. Okay. And they make her cough, those strong smells. And so much that, like, whenever she gets affected by, let's say, cigarette smells, the smoking smell, or the strong perfumes, she starts coughing, and people suspect that she's got COVID-19, and that's a problem for her. So she also gets affected by when she walks into a dirty house, Ben. Whenever she walks into a dirty house, she starts coughing. And if her house is smelly, she starts coughing, and it affects her. Whenever she comes around people who don't like bathing and they smell, she gets affected as well, and she ends up losing her inhaler. Can you believe that? Right. And if she goes into a bus, you know how sometimes in the buses people are sweaty and they're smelly, and they're unhygienic. She gets affected by that as well. She can't breathe. Okay, so I think I'm just going to leave that, and then I'll talk to you about what her recommendations are, because she talked about a lot of things. So have you got a comment on that? And then I'll tell you the second part, because there's 3 parts to her story. So that's the first part.
She's really unlucky to be hypersensitive and allergic to anything.
Just hold on. I'll translate to you if I have to.
Yeah, she's very unlucky.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. She's very unlucky to be one of the comparatively few people that she is allergic and or hypersensitive to many, many different chemicals, and right from perfumes to solvents to one of the 300 or so different chemicals in cigarette smoke, to body odors, to anything else. Some people have got it really, really badly. As it happens, we're getting more of those in the industrialized world by far, more people with more food allergies and ordinary allergies. And there's a strong correlation there with we've become too clean quite often. And as I said earlier, our immune system is less able to detect friend from foe. For instance, when people started getting more worried because peanut allergies started increasing a lot, then they started not giving babes nearly as many different foods, stop giving them peanuts, stop giving them all these other things. We now know that if a babe has peanuts or other foods when they're really quite young, when they start having solids, the sooner they have contact with those orally before they have contact with them on their skin, if they had them orally when they're young, they're less likely to develop allergies later on. Whereas if babe is cleaned very well, for instance, and they're microscopic little tears or abrasions on their skin, and they have contact with that smoke or perfume or anything else before they ingest it, then they're much more likely to get an allergy to those things later on. So the industrialized world went very much from keep all babes away from all these foods to no. That was the wrong thing to do. That was the wrong thing to do. We must get them to have contact orally much sooner, and that reduces allergies. But there will be other more complex reasons that we don't understand why, but it's really, really blights her life. And people that do have coughs because of allergies, I agree with her, it makes it really uncomfortable for them when something like COVID's going around and everyone's suspicious of any cough. It's a major, major hurdle to overcome. Try translating that to her.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. Saka, ari kuti, yes, saka nangobvunza the first part yega. Kuti izvo, zvamataura zvoti mukapinda panzvimbo dzakasiyana siyana inoita kuti mutange kukosora ndizvi, and smoke here. Okay, I hope that's coming back. Ben, can you still hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
I can. Yes.
All right, that's good. Okay. Saka apa ari kuti iye unogona kunge uine ma-allergies and it's chinhu chiri quite rare, hazviwanikwe kakawanda, but zviri kuramba zvichiwedzera mazuva ano because vanhu vakawanda takunya utsanana hwakadarikidzisa tichikangamwa kuti dzimwe nguva pane humwe utachiwana hwatinonidha muupenyu kuitira kuti tijairire, but vanhu taakungoti zvese zvese zvauya taakuklina, zvese zvese zvauya taakuklina, saka taakusara tisina that protective flora imwe iya yekuti tinoinidha muupenyu hwenyu. Muchanzwa achitaura nezvema-good and bad bugs, saka itopic yatichauya nayo mumwe musi yokuti tongoklina zvese zvese here kana kuti imwe tsvina tinoinidha. Saka anyway, for you ari kuti ye munogona munge muri hypersensitive, zviya zvokuti muri allergic kune zvinhu zvakawandisa, zviya zvokuti hamupindirani nezvinhu zvakawanda, but apa example yekuti pane nguva yekuti vana vakambenge vachinzanzi vari allergic kunzungu. Uri kuziva handizi ku-UK, isusu muno muNew Zealand ndakambosvika time yekuti ndainzi mwana hafangu peka lunch ine dovi kana kuti ine nzungu mukati, because vana vakawanda vari allergic kunzungu. Vanoti vakaona nzungu vanoita anaphylactic shock. Vazoita ma-research vakazoona kuti zvitori nani kuti mupe mwana nzungu achiri mudiki agara ajairira nzungu dziye, because kwese kwachaenda achasangana nezvinhu izvo zvamunoda kuti hanzi ari allergic. So ari kuti hanzi ndo zvimwe zvezvinhu zvokuti maybe zvingatariswa izvozvo. Handizi kuti maamboitwa allergy test here yekuti muoneke kuti zvinhu zvamuri allergic to zvingani, mogona kutozoona kuti zvakawandisa, because the way yamadescribe nayo zvinhu ka yekuti you are one person.
Ndakatoenda ndega kwadhokta because ndandakosora zvokuti pahuro panga pakuti manje kuchirwadza ende nembabvu dzangu dzese dzanza kurwadza dzisagona kurara, saka ndobva ndandova explain ndiri inini kwaexplain kuti ndida kuti tichikuitika ndikushanda but vamwe vangu vanosimuka pandinenge ndichishanda navo, saka ndikavaudza kuti muri kusimuka vanobva vatozontinini kuti kana munhu achifara chaanofarira iwe usingachifari kwaudza munhu ka you don't understand, unombozviziva. Saka ndadaro so ndobva ndikavaudza ndikati inini ndikapinda mumba mune svina, muchinhuwa tsvina mumba, ndinokosora zvokuti ndikakukosorera soka ndinotobata ndichikosora until when ndata calm down for I think 30 minutes just calm down. Takakubhedha manje mweya kupema manje mweya mumba mamandapinda macho mumba macho na imomo, saka ndinyanyi kuda kungofistira vanhu because mweya dzacho vanoti ukapinda mba memunhu dzimwe dzenguva ukapinda mba munogona kutonacho kumba momukamu munotwa netsvina inodzi svina ende vanhu vachona havageze.
All right, so you are all right, so
nhumbi dzedzichinwa tsvina vanenge miraunzwe vanenge vane mbwa vanenge vane katsi munenge mune dust zvese izvozvo, saka ndipo pakazoonekwa kanzi ndine sematauro awaita kuti ataura kuti izvo ndine sensitive iri high, ndio matauro avakaindita dokta wangu.
All right, so ipapo makapiwa nema-antihistamines here kuti musahotsire and all that stuff, tumapirisi tokuitira kuti all right.
Ndakapiwa but handihotsire tinokosora, handihotsire, handina flu, zvese zvozvo handina izvozvo. Ndofunga iwo watinoshanda muhospitals kandimo ndoshanda, saka I know what is main things, saka I know zvandiri kutaura nezvandinoziva zvatinazvo muhospital nokuti ndoshanda wemomo ndichiona zvinenge zvichiitika.
All right, muhospital unoita basa rei muhospital, if you don't mind me cutting off a little bit, muhospital unoita basa rei?
No, ndiri
carer. So she's a caregiver in the hospital and in a hospital bin, but also Yeah, because I think some of the things will take them to the backstage. In retrospect, Ben is very awkward for Ben. She has also asked a question which I think I'll just pause you for a little bit, Nyasha. Abvunza kuti zvohanzi. Oh, sorry, Ben. I forgot you don't speak Shona. She is asking. She is asking for you to encourage people to clean their houses and keep their houses fresh and clean, Ben. She is asking you to encourage people. And I know what you're going to say about this. But she is saying maybe, she is also saying that maybe, Ben, what we think is COVID-19 is COVID-19. Maybe it's just dirt. Maybe it's just people are just too dirty, she thinks.
I don't think the whole world would have suddenly got equally dirty at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Hold on, hold it. I'm just gonna put you down a little bit. So Ben, she is asking, don't you think this COVID-19 is because people are smoking too much cigarettes and because people are not cleaning their houses, Ben? Is it not because people are not bathing their whole body and only focusing on the washing their they're only focusing on washing their hands, not their whole body? They're not washing their clothes. That's a question, Ben. I'll leave that. Yeah, we'll let Ben answer. So you're gonna be quiet for a little bit and let Ben answer.
It seems like a good idea, but we can actually test for the virus, and we know that it comes from an infected lung. It comes from an infected lung, and we can find it in the lung and there only. And we know when someone coughs it, it goes over to somebody else in a street or anywhere else. So I don't think the environment actually plays a very big part in transmission at all. I think as far as allergies go, some people are just really unlucky, like she is. Yeah. But in general, the world, the industrialized world, is cleaning up more and more and more. And that's where the allergies are increasing. And there's lots of good evidence on that. I'll leave it that simply.
I think I'm going to leave it at that for now, Nyasha, and then you want to Ben Mozotaura na kuseri. How's that? I think, Ben, you and Nyasha, you need to talk.
And neither will convince the other.
Okay. Right. You know what? Nyasha, I love you. You know what? I'm going to do a live just with you. And we're gonna do it in Shona. You and me. We're gonna do the live in Shona and we're gonna answer these questions. But for now, let me just put you on the side and let me finish off with Ben and see what else is coming up. But I think Shavara live here just now. Just hold on there. Just hold. Or let me go phone back. Let me call you back. Zoka, I'll go pa comment section. I'll call you back. Okay. So Ben, in closing, she is saying, can you please encourage people to wash their armpits, wash their clothes, but their whole body, because this COVID-19, she doesn't understand where it's coming from. So I think this could be, you know what? I don't believe she's the only person who is thinking like this. And you know, our main target is Africa at the moment. And we're going to get a lot of questions like this when we go on radio. And we have to be prepared for this. I know we are finding it a little bit funny, but I just really love the way she's talking, because this is what we're gonna be coming across when we go on radio, and I'll be doing a lot of translation for you. And imagine that grandpa and grandma calling in and asking about COVID-19. Katina, what is this COVID-19 chinu ichi, this thing, you know? So there's gonna be quite a lot of this, and I think this is a little hint of what you are in for, Ben. So you're gonna tell people to wash their armpits, clean their hands, clean their bodies instead of their hands, or are you gonna stick with wash your hands, wear your masks, and
it depends how much truth we need to be pragmatic about. If it helps people feel better emotionally, then it's important. And emotion is important in disease severity, and having purpose in life is important. But the science will show a different perspective to some of that, and maybe there's room for both.
Yeah. I love it. Stop it, Ben. I just love it. So what was her name? Nyasha Chipare, thank you so much. You know, you've just opened, I think I'm gonna call this a can of worms, which I don't know. I don't even know how to close it because it's on me. I'm gonna do a live with her. I've got her number now, which is beautiful. Nyasha, just so you know, that zima number yako pa comment section. Don't do that. Ikana wine number yageta unge yangu nini which is public, that's fine. But ndine my numbers too. That's why I can give my number like that. But don't give your number like that. Who knows, you know. So my number, as you can see, guys, those who wanted Ben's number, it's up there, and his number is everywhere on websites and everywhere. 0276273201. Just the same as my one as well. It's available everywhere. The one that I use for the public. So Ben, you have no idea. People are gonna be calling you in the middle of the night. Poor Jane, I feel sorry for her.
I think I'll turn my phone off tonight.
And I do hope that people will be calling you speaking in Shona and Deipi Ben Uribo. But thank you all so much for tuning in, people, and I hope you found this really helpful and informative. But what we're gonna do from now on, Tambo Tandara, I mean, we actually kind of like had time to just chill. Thanks to Nyasha for bringing this lively question that kept us a little bit on our toes, but we didn't really finish answering that because she's saying, why is it that people, once they come to places like the UKs and stuff like that, they start using inhalers, but you know, they start being diagnosed of asthma and stuff. You know, my son got diagnosed of asthma here too, but we'll carry on that to tomorrow or another day when we do our next lives. I don't know how often, Ben, you want to do this. I am thinking, because I'm a jack of all trades, there's been a lot of stuff that I've been doing, you know, behind the scenes. I don't want to talk about it right now, but I'm keen on bringing these informative and educational sessions more frequently now on my pages and on YouTube, just so that Africans can actually start you know, being well informed about what's out there, the things that we already know. We know. Tell us about New Zealand, Ben, just quickly. What's happening in New Zealand with COVID-19? Why are you not wearing a mask? Why am I not wearing a mask?
In some ways, or one perspective is, we're very lucky in New Zealand that because we wore the masks and isolated people so well, closed down the businesses, so everybody had to stay at home. Because we are an isolated island, so people cannot cross over the borders without anyone knowing, we were able to completely stop all community transmissions in New Zealand. There's a big cost to that. Many businesses had to close for 4 to 6 weeks, and that's really, really good. The downside is that large numbers of people are now unemployed, and we're going to remain totally vulnerable, our population, to catching it, because nobody's had it, or very, very few people have had it. So very, very few people have immunity. And while the rest of the world, in practice, at different rates, depending on the country or the city, is slowly developing an immunity, we have none. Now, the only benefit may be if a safe, effective vaccine becomes available before too long, then we will have made the right choice and the population can be vaccinated effectively and safely, and we would have saved ourselves a lot of trouble. If an effective vaccine does not come, we're going to have to let the COVID virus work its way through New Zealand.
Thank you, Ben. And about bringing in more sessions, what are your thoughts? They won't be as long as this one because this was just introductory. We've done 3 introductory ones, and the next ones will be just on to the point, sharp and brief.
Short and sharp's fine. I've done 5.5 hours today, I think. Sure.
I'm not paying you, by the way, just so you know.
I know
Let's make
that.
that clear whilst we are in public. I am not paying you for that, Ben. Neither are you paying me.
Short and fast is good. Yes, whatever works. We can work out a time later on what suits. And it depends.
Okay, so, yeah.
It's got to fit with my working week too, of course.
Oh, just looking for something here. Give me a second, Ben. Okay, no, that's all right. Okay, all right, guys. So I think, shall we close now, Ben? Is that all right?
Yes, of course.
Oh, mortality rate. You know what? I do know that there's things that you wanted to talk about that you ended up not talking about, but I know how to bring that back tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, guys, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in, and to everyone who's going to watch this offline, like after we finish the live, I hope you will find it helpful. And to those who had questions and they didn't get a chance to ask them, please just feel free to either send them to me through the WhatsApp or send them. Ben, your WhatsApp does work sometimes, right? So you can WhatsApp them to Ben directly or to me, or email. There's an email address there which you can reach me or Ben through that same email address. So just do that and one of us will be responding to you. So God bless you guys. And once again, this is only the beginning, and we look forward to doing more informative and educational sessions with you. And if there's anything you want us to improve, we will do that. But this is just us. We keep it so simple. Ben?
Yes. Thank you very much for your attendance, everybody. I hope it's been worthwhile and you've learned something. And it'll hopefully help allay some of your fears, not increase them. Know what you know, do what you can to reduce the risk, and get on and enjoy life with a little bit of exercise, good sleep, and a varied diet. Thank you.
More vegetables.
More vegetables. More variety of vegetables. You can have meat too, but more variety of vegetables. Yes.
So guys, for those who didn't know, Ben is actually my business partner, and this is how we work. And things don't really go well most of the times because we don't agree. We just agree to disagree. One of us likes to keep things super clean, and then there's one who goes the other extreme. So Nyasha, if you're listening, you are talking, you are actually making the distance between me and Ben wider and wider. So we're gonna come, and I think we'll bring in different topics just so that people understand where we're coming from. And I'm sorry guys, you couldn't see me clearly because I don't know, for some reason the light in my bedroom just makes me look darker than I am, but that's okay. Black is beautiful. And today nobody said anything about my hair. This is so good, Ben. So yeah, I'm gonna sign out of here, guys, and thank you all so much. It's actually 10:21 p.m. in New Zealand. Can you believe it, Ben? 3.5 hours. Well done. Did you have dinner?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
I haven't. So the kids, I can hear them. They haven't even gone to sleep. Guys, thank you so much. We're going to sign out of here before we start talking about other things you don't want to hear.
Okay.
All right.
Bye for now.